This channel focuses on stories about the lives of single fathers, where I share the hidden struggles, pressures, and quiet love that are not always expressed in real life. The videos use AI to support elements such as voice and visuals, but all content is carefully crafted, edited, and developed through storytelling. These stories are fictional and inspired by various real-life situations, so they are meant to be experienced as narratives rather than taken as absolute truth. To me, even if a story isn't entirely real, as long as it can touch emotions and make people reflect, it still holds real value.
He was just trying to get a cup of coffee. She was just trying to fix a broken machine. But in 60 seconds beside a malfunctioning espresso maker on a Tuesday afternoon, Daniel Carter's entire future changed. And he didn't even know it yet. She was older, guarded, careful with her heart in the way that only someone who had been hurt before could be. He was a single father with calloused hands and a daughter who needed everything he had left. They had no business falling in love. But love, real love, has never once cared about business. Drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this story travels. The morning Daniel Carter turned 32, he woke up at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of his daughter knocking on his bedroom door. He hadn't asked for a wake-up call. He hadn't needed one in years. His body had long since surrendered to the schedule, the relentless, grinding, merciless schedule of a single father who had learned the hard way that children do not care about your sleep. "Daddy," Emma's voice floated through the hollow core door, small and sweet and absolutely unapologetic. "I can't find my left shoe." Daniel lay still for exactly 3 seconds, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that he kept meaning to fix. Then he threw back the covers and stood up. "Just the left one?" he called back, already moving toward the door. "Yeah, the right one's by the couch." "Of course it is," he muttered to no one. This was his life. And on most days, he didn't mind it. On most days, the beautiful chaos of raising Emma, the lost shoes and the forgotten permission slips and the elaborate bedtime negotiations was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. But on the morning he turned 32, standing in his kitchen in a wrinkled undershirt and gray sweatpants, making scrambled eggs while Emma explained in exhaustive detail why her teacher was probably a vampire, Daniel felt something he didn't quite have a word for. Not loneliness exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that sat in the corner of a room and waited. He dropped Emma at Riverside Elementary at 7:52 a.m., 8 minutes before the bell. She hopped out of the car with her backpack bouncing and her left shoe, found under the bathroom sink of all places, tied in a knot that would absolutely come undone by recess. "Have a good day, Bug," he called through the open window. "You too, Daddy," she shouted back, already sprinting toward a cluster of friends near the front steps. She didn't look back. 8-year-olds rarely do. Daniel sat in the drop-off line for a moment longer than necessary, watching the doors close behind her. Then he pulled out into traffic and drove toward downtown Columbus, where the Meridian Logistics Group occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a glass-faced office building on High Street. He'd worked there for 6 years. Operations manager. He oversaw shipping contracts, vendor relationships, and a team of 11 people whose problems somehow always became his problems by 9 in the morning. It was good work, steady work, the kind of work that paid for Emma's school supplies and the water heater he'd replaced last winter, and the small but reliable savings account he'd been building since she was born. It was not the life he'd imagined at 22. But then again, nothing about his life had gone the way he'd imagined at 22. His ex-wife Claire had left when Emma was 3 years old. Daniel didn't talk about it much, not at work, not with most friends, and certainly not on dates, of which there had been precisely 4 in the past 5 years, all of them disastrous in their own distinct and memorable ways. He'd learned to give the short version when someone pressed, "We wanted different things. Emma stays with me. We're civil." That was true, as far as it went. Claire lived in Portland now with a man named Garrett, who sold high-end outdoor furniture and had excellent hair. She video-called Emma on Sundays and flew her out twice a year. It worked, in the imperfect, quietly painful way that post-divorce co-parenting tends to work. Daniel had made his peace with it, or something close enough to peace that he'd stopped examining the difference. What he hadn't made peace with, what he wasn't sure he'd ever fully understand, was how completely he had reorganized himself around his daughter. Not reluctantly, not resentfully, willingly, deliberately. He had looked at the wreckage of his marriage and decided that the only thing worth building from the ruins was Emma's childhood, and so he had built it. But sometimes, on mornings like this one, gray February sky pressing down on the city, coffee going cold on the passenger seat, the radio playing a love song he didn't recognize, he caught a glimpse of that other thing, that quiet, unnamed feeling in the corner of the room. He turned off the radio. He drove to work. The Meridian Logistics Group occupied a building that had been renovated sometime in the early 2000s and not touched since. The lobby smelled like recycled air and carpet cleaner. The elevators were slow. The fluorescent lights in the 14th floor hallway flickered slightly on cold days, which in Columbus meant they flickered from October through April. Daniel had stopped noticing any of this years ago. What he had not stopped noticing, what he could not stop noticing, no matter how relentlessly ordinary the building was the shared lounge on the 12th floor. It wasn't anything special. A row of vending machines, a long counter with 2 microwaves, a commercial espresso machine that the building management kept promising to replace and never did, 4 round tables, 8 chairs, a window that looked out over a parking garage. But the 12th floor was shared between 3 companies, which meant the lounge was populated at different hours by people he didn't work with, people whose names he didn't know, people who moved through his peripheral vision like background characters in a movie about someone else's life. He went down there most afternoons around 2 o'clock, when the particular density of his workday hit a kind of trough. Enough things handled to breathe, enough things remaining to make him want to avoid his desk for exactly 12 minutes. On the Tuesday afternoon in question, the second week of February, 4 days after his birthday, Daniel rode the elevator down to the 12th floor, walked into the lounge, and stopped in front of the espresso machine. The screen was flashing a red error code he had never seen before. E7, system fault, contact service. He stared at it. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He unplugged it and plugged it back in. The screen flickered, displayed the error, and went dark. He pressed every button on the front panel in sequence, the way a man does when he knows nothing about a machine but refuses to admit it. "You look like you're trying to negotiate with it." The voice came from behind him, calm, amused, unhurried, not mocking, more like someone who found the situation genuinely entertaining and saw no reason to hide it. Daniel turned around. The woman standing behind him was holding a travel mug in one hand and a paper bag from the sandwich place on the ground floor in the other. She was looking at the machine and then at him, with an expression that managed to be simultaneously polite and deeply entertained. She was, he registered in a series of rapid and somewhat involuntary observations, striking. Not in the glossy, constructed way that certain people were striking. In a quieter way. The kind of striking that didn't announce itself but simply existed. In the angle of her cheekbones, in the way she held herself, in the particular quality of stillness she projected even while clearly preparing to say something. "Third time this week," Daniel said, gesturing at the machine. "I think it hates me specifically." "It doesn't hate you," the woman said, setting her bag and mug on the counter beside him. "It has a clogged drip tray. It's been doing this since Friday." She said it the way someone says something they know to be true, matter-of-factly, without performance. Then she reached forward, located a small release panel on the side of the machine that Daniel had not noticed existed, and clicked it open. Inside was a shallow metal tray that had filled to the brim with old grounds and standing water. "There," she said. She pulled the tray out carefully, carried it to the sink, rinsed it, dried it with a paper towel, and slid it back into place. Then she pressed the power button once. The machine hummed. The screen lit up green. Within 30 seconds, it began cycling through its startup sequence. Daniel watched all of this in silence. "How did you know that?" he asked. "My father owned a restaurant," she said simply. "I grew up learning which machines were pretending to be broken and which ones actually were." She picked up her travel mug and opened it, positioning it under the spout. This one was pretending. "Olivia Bennett," she said, extending her free hand while the machine worked. "I'm with Hartwell Consulting. We're up on 16. "Daniel Carter." He shook her hand. "Operations, 14 and 15. He paused. "I feel like I owe you coffee, except the coffee you just fixed is technically mine." She laughed at that. A real laugh, not a polite one. Short and genuine and slightly surprised, as if she hadn't expected the joke to land and was pleased that it did. "Keep your coffee," she said. "I have tea." She held up the travel mug, and he noticed for the first time that it was already full. Man. They talked for 22 minutes. Daniel knew this because he had a 2 o'clock call he was mildly concerned about missing, and he kept glancing at his watch in a way that he hoped was not obvious, but almost certainly was. Olivia, for her part, did not appear to be watching any clock at all. She ate half of her sandwich, sipped her tea, and talked the way some people do. Easily, without effort, without the faint, anxious energy that Daniel had come to associate with most workplace small talk. They talked about the building, its particular institutional glumness, the parking situation, the elevator that stopped on 11 for no discernible reason. They talked about Columbus winters and whether the city had any right to call itself a food destination. Olivia said yes. Daniel said it was trying very hard and mostly succeeding, which she laughed at again. They talked about the specific misery of performance review season, which was apparently approaching at Hartwell Consulting with the same grim inevitability that it was at Meridian. What they did not talk about, Daniel noticed afterward, was anything personal. Not in the direct way. No mention of families or relationships or histories. The conversation stayed on the surface of things. Friendly, easy, warm, but it was the warmth of a fire you could see through a window rather than one you were standing next to. He made his 2 o'clock call, but he thought about the conversation for the rest of the afternoon. No, the second time he saw her was Thursday of the same week. He'd come down to the lounge earlier than usual, 11:30, chasing a headache that had settled behind his eyes since morning, and she was already there, sitting at one of the round tables with a laptop open and a pen tucked behind her ear, staring at her screen with the focused intensity of someone who had forgotten there were other people in the room. Daniel got his espresso, so the machine mercifully was working, and started toward the door. He was almost there. "Carter," she said, without looking up from her screen. He stopped. "Bennett, you look terrible," she said, still not looking up. "Thank you. Migraine. Drink water before the espresso, you're dehydrating it." "You can't dehydrate a migraine." "You absolutely can." Now she looked up. Her reading glasses were low on her nose, and she looked at him over the rims with an expression that suggested she had very little patience for incorrect medical self-treatment. "Water first, then the coffee. Trust me." He stood there for a moment, then he went back to the counter, got a bottle of water from the refrigerator, drank half of it, and then took his espresso. "Better?" she asked when he passed her table again. "Ask me in 20 minutes, he said. "I won't be here in 20 minutes. He paused at the door. "Then I'll report back Thursday." "I'll look forward to it," she said, and went back to her screen. 20 minutes later, his headache was noticeably better. He was not going to tell her that. He told her on Thursday. She said, "Obviously." Maat. This became the rhythm of it. Not a schedule exactly. Nothing so formal. More like a pattern that emerged naturally, the way certain paths in a park develop, not because anyone planned them, but because enough people found them useful. 2 or 3 times a week, they overlapped in the 12th floor lounge. Sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for 45. Sometimes they talked about work, the abstract kind, the venting kind, the "this situation is genuinely absurd" kind. Sometimes they talked about the city, about books, about films. Olivia had opinions about everything and delivered them with a directness that Daniel found, against all expectation, deeply refreshing. Most of the women he knew, the ones he worked with, the few he'd attempted to date, performed a kind of careful ambivalence, as if having strong opinions were a social liability. Olivia had apparently never received that memo. She thought the downtown renovation had been a mistake aesthetically, but a success economically. She thought cold brew was a marketing creation with no practical superiority over iced coffee. She thought the HBO adaptation of that novel everyone had read 3 years ago had fundamentally misunderstood its protagonist, and she was prepared to explain why in considerable detail. Daniel disagreed with about 40% of her opinions and found himself looking forward to that 40% specifically. They texted occasionally, building logistics mostly. "The lounge microwave is broken again. The elevators are down, take the stairs." Small, practical things. But the texts had started happening, which was its own kind of milestone. though neither of them acknowledged it as one. He told Marcus about her. Marcus Webb was Daniel's closest friend, had been since college, a relentlessly cheerful software developer who lived in Dublin, Ohio with his wife and twin sons, and who possessed the particular gift of asking exactly the right question at exactly the right moment. "So she fixes machines and tells you to drink water," Marcus said. They were at a bar in the short north, watching a Cavaliers game neither of them particularly cared about. "And you're telling me about her because it's an interesting situation. The interesting situation being that you like her. The interesting situation being that we have good conversations." Marcus took a slow sip of his beer. "Daniel." "What?" "You have described this woman for approximately 20 minutes. You have been talking for 20 minutes about a woman. You don't do that." Daniel didn't have a good answer for that, so he watched the game. "How old is she?" Marcus asked. "I don't know exactly." "Guess." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Older than me, maybe 8 years, 10, somewhere in there." "Does that bother you?" "No. Why would it?" Marcus smiled at the television in the satisfied way of a man who has heard exactly what he needed to hear. "No reason," he said pleasantly. "Drink your beer." It was a Thursday evening in early March when Daniel finally said the thing out loud. They were in the lounge later than usual. Both of them had been at their desks until nearly 7, a coincidence confirmed by the near-simultaneous ping of their phones, the building's automated visitor system, clearing the security logs for the day. The lounge was empty at that hour. The vending machines hummed. The lights over the counter gave everything a slightly amber tint. Olivia had been telling him about a consulting engagement she'd recently wrapped, a mid-sized manufacturing company in Dayton whose leadership team had, in her professional assessment, constructed a Byzantine organizational chart specifically designed to ensure that no one could ever be held accountable for anything. 12 direct reports, she said, to the CEO. 12. And every single one of them believed they were the most important person in the company. What happened? We restructured it. 3 divisions, clear chains of accountability, quarterly reporting. She paused. 2 of the 12 quit within a month. Were they the right 2? She considered this. Yes and no. One of them leaving was a genuine loss. He was talented and he was afraid of accountability because he'd been burned by bad leadership before, not because he was bad at his job. She looked into her tea. I think about that sometimes, whether we could have done that part differently. Daniel watched her. It was the first time he'd heard her express doubt about her professional judgment, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet honesty of someone who thought carefully about the people they'd affected. You could have been a therapist, he said. I would have been a terrible therapist, she said immediately. I have no patience for people who already know the answer and refuse to say it. He laughed. Okay, fair. No, there was a pause. The comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't require filling. Then Daniel said, lightly, almost casually, as if it weren't a thing he'd been thinking about for 3 weeks. One day I might actually have to take you on a real date. He heard his own words land in the air between them. He watched her face. She didn't look away. She didn't smile immediately, the way someone does when they're pleased and trying not to show it. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something careful and considering behind her eyes, something that was working through a calculation he wasn't privy to. Then she asked, in a voice that had gone slightly quieter, Does it bother you that I'm older than you? The question surprised him. Not because it was unexpected exactly. The age gap was real, and he wasn't naive enough to think she hadn't noticed it, but because of the weight with which she asked it. This was not a deflection. This was not coyness. This was a genuine question from a woman who had, he understood in that moment, reasons to ask it. No, he said, simply and without qualification. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, carefully, as if storing his answer somewhere specific, somewhere she could find it again later. Okay, she said. She finished her tea. She picked up her bag. She said goodnight, and Daniel sat in the empty lounge for another 10 minutes, the vending machines humming around him, trying to figure out exactly what had just happened and whether it was something or nothing, and knowing, with a certainty that surprised him, that it was something. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in the peculiar emotional discipline of not pushing. Their lounge meetings continued. The texts continued. Nothing explicit changed, but something had shifted in the atmosphere of their interactions. A new awareness that sat just below the surface of every conversation, present and unacknowledged by mutual and unspoken agreement. Olivia was warmer, he thought, but also more deliberate. She laughed more easily, and yet she never let the conversation drift into territory that might be mistaken for something other than friendship. She was kind. She was engaged. And she maintained, with the practiced precision of someone who had thought carefully about where she stood, an invisible perimeter around herself that Daniel could not quite locate. He found himself analyzing things he normally wouldn't, the length of a pause, the way she sometimes looked at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Whether "see you Thursday" at the end of a text was a statement or an invitation. He realized, 32 years old and dissecting text messages like a teenager, and he found this both embarrassing and entirely impossible to stop. Marcus naturally found it hilarious. "You're spiraling," Marcus told him over the phone one evening, Emma asleep down the hall, the apartment quiet around Daniel as he stood at the kitchen window, looking at the parking lot below. "I'm analyzing. That's what spiraling is. She asked me that question and then nothing happened, and I don't know what nothing means." "Nothing means she's thinking," Marcus said. "Some people think before they do things, Daniel. Some of us were raised that way." "And what am I supposed to do while she's thinking?" "Continue to exist," Marcus said patiently, "and not be weird about it." Daniel took a breath. "Right. She asked you a real question. You gave her a real answer. That's more progress than you've made with anyone in 4 years. Give her space to do whatever she's going to do with it. And if she decides to do nothing?" A pause. "Then you survive that too," Marcus said. "But I don't think that's what's going to happen." It was a Wednesday evening near the end of March, raining with the particular relentlessness of a Midwestern spring rain, cold and steady and total, the kind that doesn't threaten to stop, when Daniel and Olivia left the building at the same time. It was a coincidence. He was fairly certain it was a coincidence. She had an umbrella. He did not. They stood for a moment under the building's overhang, watching the rain sheet across the sidewalk, and he offered to walk her to the parking garage across the street because he was going that direction anyway. She said yes. They walked quickly, her umbrella barely large enough for both of them, his left shoulder getting wet immediately. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, blue and yellow and red, shimmering and unstable. She was talking about something, a meeting she'd had that afternoon, something about a client who couldn't decide what they wanted. And he was listening, but he was also aware, in a way that was difficult to be rational about, of how close she was, of the particular smell of rain and her jacket and something beneath it, warm and faint, that he couldn't identify. They reached the garage entrance. She lowered the umbrella and shook it, and they stood for a moment in the dry fluorescent dimness of the garage's first level. "Thank you," she said, "for the escort. Any time. My shoulder is honored to have sacrificed itself for the cause." She smiled. Then she looked at him, and there was something in her expression that was different from the careful warmth she usually showed him, something slightly unguarded, something that had relaxed while he wasn't watching. "I like how easy it is to talk to you," she said. Her voice was quiet. The rain hammered the concrete outside. Inside the garage, it was very still. Daniel looked at her. He wanted very badly to say something that matched the moment, something honest without being heavy, something that acknowledged what she'd said without turning it into more than she'd offered. "I feel the same way," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "Good night, Daniel," she said. "Good night, Olivia." He watched her walk toward the elevator, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. She pressed the button. She did not look back. The elevator opened. She stepped inside. And Daniel stood in the entrance of the parking garage in the rain and understood, with sudden and complete clarity, that he had absolutely no intention of letting this quietly dissolve. He let 5 days pass before he said anything. He wasn't sure he was capable of the kind of patience Marcus had recommended, but he gave it 5 days, which was the longest he was willing to wait without feeling like he was actively retreating. It was a Monday. Late afternoon, the lounge between lunch rush and the early evening crowd, just the two of them again, as chance or routine had arranged it. Rain against the windows again. Columbus in March was committed to the bit. He sat down across from her at the round table. She had her laptop open. She looked up when he sat down, which she always did, but this time she closed the laptop slightly. Not all the way, but enough to signal that whatever this was, it had priority over the screen. He didn't lead with anything clever this time. "I'd really like to take you on a proper date," he said. The words sat there. Olivia looked at him. She looked at her coffee cup. The rain tapped against the glass. Then she asked, softer this time, almost as if she were asking herself, "Does it bother you that I'm older?" He had answered this question once. He answered it again now, the same way, without hesitation. "Not even slightly," he said. "What matters to me is how I feel when I'm with you, and how I feel when I'm with you is like I haven't felt in a long time." He paused. "I'd rather say that and have you tell me you're not interested than not say it and wonder." A long silence. Olivia looked at him for what felt like a very long time. He watched the calculation moving behind her eyes. Something working, something weighing, something arriving at an answer. Then she exhaled. "Dinner," she said. "One dinner, downtown. Somewhere we can actually talk." "Yes," he said, immediately, without qualification. She looked almost amused by his speed. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She reopened her laptop. He drank his espresso. Outside, the rain continued, indifferent and steady. But inside Daniel Carter, something that had been very quiet for a very long time had suddenly, and without much fanfare, come awake. He spent 3 days deciding on the restaurant, not obsessively. He told himself it wasn't obsessive, but carefully. He researched and eliminated. Too loud, too trendy, too romantic in a theatrical way that would be embarrassing rather than meaningful. He wanted somewhere that understood that food was a context for conversation, not a performance for its own sake. Somewhere the lighting was right without being obvious about it. He eventually settled on a place in the short north called Forte, a mid-size Italian restaurant that had been in the neighborhood for 11 years, long enough to have found its identity without having to constantly perform it. White tablecloths. No background music loud enough to require raising your voice. A menu that was ambitious but not exhausting. Marcus approved. "Good choice. Not trying too hard. That's the whole thing." Emma, who Daniel had told exactly nothing specific about the evening, somehow intuited that something was happening. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked on Saturday afternoon, watching him iron a shirt he never wore on ordinary weekends. "I'm having dinner with a friend." "What friend?" "Someone I know from work." Emma considered this with the particular forensic intelligence of 8-year-olds who miss nothing and file everything for later use. "Is it a lady friend? You sound like your grandfather when you say it that way." "Is it?" "Finish your homework," Daniel said. Emma turned back to the kitchen table and her math worksheets with the expression of someone who had all the information she needed. Daniel's mother, Carol, arrived at 6 to stay with Emma. She kissed her son on the cheek and looked at the ironed shirt and said nothing, which was somehow worse than anything she could have said. "Have fun," she told him. "Don't be awkward." "That's not helpful, Mom." "It's very helpful. Don't overthink it. Just talk to her." He drove downtown with the radio off. Olivia was already seated when he arrived. She was the kind of person, he would learn, who was always already seated. She had a water glass in front of her and her phone face down on the table, and she was watching the door in a way that she immediately pretended she hadn't been doing when he walked in. She was wearing something dark, deep green, he thought, though the light made it difficult to be certain, and she looked different from the office version of her. Not dramatically different. Not as if she'd transformed. More as if a layer had been set aside. She looked, he realized, like a woman who had decided to show up fully. He sat down. He said hello. She said hello. And then, almost immediately, the careful strangeness of the early date dissolved because they simply started talking. About the restaurant, about the short north, about the particular transformation that area of Columbus had undergone in the past decade, and within minutes it felt like the lounge on the 12th floor, except with better bread and proper lighting. The evening moved. After the appetizers were cleared and the wine had done its work on the formality of the thing, Daniel said, Can I ask you something? You can ask, she said. Why did you ask me that question twice? The age thing. Olivia turned her wine glass slowly between her fingers. She was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, he understood, but giving it its due. I was engaged, she said finally, 7 years ago, to someone who told me the difference didn't matter, that he didn't care, that it was irrelevant, that I was overthinking it. She paused. He was 29. I was 38. And when the reality of our life together started to take a specific shape, when I wanted to stop traveling for work and he wanted to start, when I was ready for something permanent and he realized he didn't know what he wanted yet, the age gap was suddenly very relevant. She said it without bitterness, factually, evenly, with the detached precision of a woman who had processed something difficult and arrived on the other side of it. So I ask, she said, not because I believe you're lying when you say it doesn't matter, but because I want the answer to be something you've actually thought about, not something you've said because it seemed like the right thing to say. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I'm 32, he said. I have an 8-year-old daughter and a mortgage and a job I take seriously. I'm not searching for an adventure. I'm not between chapters of my life. He met her eyes. I know what I want, and I know what I'm not willing to waste. Olivia looked at him. Then she nodded. Slowly, as she had in the lounge, but with something different in it this time. Something that had come to a decision. Tell me about Emma, she said. And just like that, the last piece of formal distance between them dissolved. He told her about Emma. He told her about the lost shoes and the bedtime negotiations and the elaborate theory about the teacher being a vampire and the way Emma sang to herself when she thought no one could hear her, slightly off-key and completely uninhibited and entirely perfect. And Olivia listened with her whole attention in the way that very few people listened, in the way that told him she was not performing interest but actually had it. And Daniel felt, somewhere in the center of his chest, the quiet and certain awareness that he was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where he was supposed to be. They sat at that table for 3 hours and 14 minutes. Daniel knew this because the restaurant was closing, and the waiter had begun hovering with the diplomatic anxiety of a man who needed them to leave but was too professional to say so, and when Daniel finally looked at his watch, it was 10:47. He walked Olivia to her car. It was cold, clear now, the rain from earlier in the week long gone. Their breath made small clouds in the night air. At her car, she turned and looked at him. That was, she started. Yeah, he said. She smiled, slow and genuine and without any trace of the careful guarding he had grown used to. Call me tomorrow, she said. He drove home through the quiet streets of Columbus, the city spread out and still around him, and the unnamed feeling that had been sitting in the corner of his life, waiting, patient, unremarkable, was simply gone. In its place was something he recognized. He just hadn't felt it in a while. He didn't know, sitting in his car outside his darkened house at 11:15 on a Saturday night, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, he didn't know what Olivia Bennett was going to bring into his life. He didn't know about Emma's reaction, or the year of building and learning and stumbling that lay ahead, or the question he would eventually ask on a quiet evening when Emma was asleep and the television was off. He only knew what the night had given him, the certainty that asking had been right, and that whatever came next, he had chosen to show up for it, and that for now was enough. He called her the next day as she'd asked. It was Sunday, a little after noon. Emma was at the kitchen table drawing elaborate maps of an imaginary country she had been developing for the past 3 weeks. It had a capital city, several mountain ranges, and a complicated political situation involving 2 rival queens that Emma explained with the seriousness of a doctoral candidate. Daniel stood at the kitchen window with his phone and listened to it ring 3 times before she picked up. "Hi," Olivia said. She sounded like she was outside. There was wind in the background and the ambient sound of a neighborhood on a quiet Sunday morning. "Hi," he said. "You told me to call." "I did." "So I'm calling." A brief pause, and then she laughed. That same short, genuine sound he had cataloged in his memory the way he cataloged things that mattered. "I'm at the farmer's market on 5th. Are you doing anything?" He looked at Emma, who had just crowned one of her rival queens and was now drawing mountains with intense concentration. "Nothing I can't rearrange," he said. Give me 40 minutes. He rearranged it. He called his mother, who lived 12 minutes away, and had been waiting, he was fairly certain, for exactly this kind of call. Carol arrived in 11 minutes, already holding a crossword puzzle book, and told him to take his time with a look that communicated everything she chose not to say out loud. He found Olivia at a stall selling honey, examining a small glass jar with the same attentiveness she brought to everything. She was in a gray coat and dark jeans, hair loose, different from Saturday's restaurant version of her, different from the 12th floor office version of her, and somehow more herself than either. She looked up when she heard him approach and smiled without surprise, as if she'd known exactly how long 40 minutes was and had timed it precisely. You made it, she said. I said 40 minutes, he said. You said 40 minutes like it might be an aspiration, she said. You made it in 38. I was motivated. She handed him the jar of honey. He looked at it, then at her. What am I doing with this? Telling me if it's worth $12. He turned the jar over. I have no idea how to assess honey. Nobody does, she said. That's the point. You just decide if you trust it. She bought the honey. They walked through the market for 2 hours, past vegetable stalls and bread vendors, and a woman selling hand-thrown pottery and a man playing a guitar badly enough that they had to relocate quickly to avoid laughing visibly. They drank bad coffee from paper cups and ate samples of cheese that Olivia rated with the precision of someone who had strong opinions about dairy and was not ashamed of this. Daniel bought Emma a small jar of wildflower preserves because Emma had recently decided she liked wildflowers, based on information she had acquired from a nature documentary and was now treating as a core personality trait. It was easy. That was the thing about being with Olivia. It was consistently, reliably, almost unfairly easy. The conversation moved without effort, without the grinding gears of two people trying to figure out who the other one was. It felt, Daniel kept thinking, like continuing something rather than beginning it. And yet he noticed again the perimeter. It was harder to see in the open air of the market, in the Sunday lightness of the thing, but it was there. Olivia was warm, engaged, present, and she did not touch him. Not casually, not incidentally. When they were close enough that a natural gesture might have meant a hand on his arm or fingers brushing his, she managed without visible effort to be slightly beyond that reach. Not coldly, not obviously, just carefully. He noticed it the way you notice a door that is almost but not quite open, not enough to complain about, enough to be aware of. He didn't say anything. Marcus had told him to give her space, and Marcus, irritatingly, was usually right about these things. He drove home with the wildflower preserves on the passenger seat and the farmer's market afternoon turning over in his mind, and he thought, she came. She asked me to come. She laughed. She bought honey. And he held on to those facts like a man testing the weight-bearing capacity of a bridge he very much needed to cross. They had dinner again the following Friday. A Thai place in German Village that Olivia had been to before and recommended with the confident authority of someone who had done their research. Then the following Wednesday, a walk along the Scioto River after work that lasted longer than either of them planned because neither of them suggested stopping. A pattern was forming. Nothing they'd named, nothing they'd labeled, but something that had its own internal logic and momentum. And within that pattern, something else was forming too. The particular tension of two people who are moving toward each other but haven't arrived, who both know more than they're saying, who have decided, independently and without discussion, to let the thing develop at its own pace. Daniel was less patient with that pace than he let on. He didn't push. He asked Marcus every few days what Marcus thought, and Marcus told him every few days to continue existing and not be weird about it, which was becoming the least satisfying advice Daniel had ever received. He went to work. He took Emma to her soccer practice on Saturday mornings and stood on the sideline in the cold with the other parents and watched her chase the ball with complete commitment and intermittent success. He had dinner with Olivia on Friday and walked with her on Wednesday and texted her in between and missed her on the days when neither of those things happened. The missing was new. He hadn't missed anyone in a long time. Not like this, not with that specific weight that settles somewhere between the chest and the stomach and has no clinical name. He had been careful these past 5 years not to build anything that could be missed. He had kept his life contained and manageable and Emma-shaped, and that containment had protected him. He was starting to resent the protection. It was Marcus who finally named it, on a Tuesday night phone call when Daniel had been talking in circles for 20 minutes. "You're falling for her," Marcus said. Not cruelly, not with triumph, just as a statement of obvious fact. Like actually falling, not, "Oh, I like her," falling. "I know," Daniel said. "Does she know?" "I think she suspects, and she's still showing up. Every time." "Daniel," Marcus paused, "that's not nothing. That's actually everything. A careful woman who keeps showing up is saying something. You just have to be patient enough to let her say it." "I'm not a patient person." "I know. I've known you for 15 years. This is your chance to become one." Daniel did not feel encouraged by this, but he held the information Marcus had given him. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. And he carried it into the next week like something fragile that needed protecting. It was the last week of April when Olivia showed up to one of their Wednesday walks visibly different, not in a way he could have easily explained to someone who hadn't been paying attention. She was dressed the same. She greeted him the same way. She fell into step beside him on the river path with the same ease she always did. But something was tight in her, something behind her eyes was working. They walked for 10 minutes before he said anything. "What happened?" he asked. She glanced at him sideways. "What makes you think something happened?" "Because I've been paying attention to you for 3 months, and you look the way you look when something is sitting on you," he said. He kept his voice even, matter of fact, not making it bigger than it needed to be. "You don't have to tell me, but I'm asking." She was quiet for a moment. The river moved beside them, gray and wide and unhurried. "I had lunch with a friend today," she said finally. "Diane. She's been my closest friend for, God, almost 20 years. She said something." "What did she say?" Another pause. Longer this time. Olivia looked at the water. "She said she was worried about me, that she'd watched me, her word, disappear into someone before, someone who wasn't right for me, and that she was starting to see the same pattern." She stopped walking. Daniel stopped beside her. She turned toward the river and put her hands on the railing and stared out at the opposite bank. "She was talking about you, or not specifically about you, about the age thing, about what she calls my blind spots." "What are your blind spots?" Daniel asked. According to Diane, Olivia's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not anger exactly. Something closer to old hurt dressed up as composure. "I fall for men who aren't ready for the life I want. Who say they are, who believe they are, and then discover, gradually, irreversibly, that they're not. And by the time that discovery happens, I've already—" She stopped. "Already what?" he said quietly. She didn't answer immediately. A jogger passed behind them, headphones in, oblivious. The water moved. "Already built something I then have to dismantle," she said. Her voice was even, factual. But her knuckles on the railing were pale. Daniel looked at her profile. He wanted to say the right thing. He was, in that moment, acutely aware of how much the wrong thing would cost. How a well-intentioned but clumsy reassurance could land as exactly the kind of thing she was afraid of. A man who said what sounded right without understanding what was being asked. "Does Diane know me?" he asked. "No." "Has she met me?" "No." "Does she know anything about me beyond what you've told her?" Olivia turned to look at him. Her expression was complicated. "No, but then I'm not saying Diane is wrong," Daniel said carefully. "She knows you in a way I don't yet. She knows your history in a way I don't yet. And she loves you, which is why she said it." He held Olivia's gaze. "But she's not assessing me. She's assessing a category she's put me in. And I think you know that's not the same thing." Olivia looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very calm response," she said. "Most people get defensive." "Getting defensive would prove her point," he said. Something shifted in Olivia's expression. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. She turned back to the river. "She's not wrong about my history," she said, quieter now. "The pattern she's describing is real. I'm not going to pretend otherwise just because—" She stopped again. "Just because what?" he pressed gently. She shook her head slightly, not refusing to answer, processing. The river moved. A bird called somewhere on the opposite bank. Just because this feels different, she said finally. So quiet. He almost missed it. Daniel didn't say anything. He stood beside her at the railing and let those words exist in the air between them without rushing to do anything with them. He understood instinctively that this was one of those moments where speaking would cost more than silence. After a while, she exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to release something she'd been holding since lunch, and pushed back from the railing. "Can we keep walking?" she said. "Yeah," he said, we can keep walking." They walked another hour and they talked about other things. Emma's soccer team, a difficult vendor Daniel was managing at work, a book Olivia had started and abandoned, and neither of them returned to what she'd said at the railing. But it was there, underneath everything. This feels different. It hung in the air of the whole evening, luminous and precise. He drove home with it sitting in the passenger seat beside him, more present than anything he could have touched. He told Emma about Olivia for the first time on a Saturday morning in early May. Not completely, not with detail or weight. Emma was 8, and 8-year-olds required information at a specific volume, enough to satisfy curiosity without creating anxiety. Daniel had thought carefully about what volume was appropriate. Emma was eating cereal at the kitchen table, reading the back of the cereal box with the focused attention she gave to everything printed when Daniel sat down across from her with his coffee. "Hey, Bug," he said, "I want to tell you something." Emma looked up from the cereal box. She assessed him with that particular 8-year-old forensic attention that he had never quite gotten used to. "Is it good or bad?" "Good, I think. Maybe very good." "Okay." She set down the spoon, gave him her full attention in the way she did when she had decided something was worth it. "You know I have a friend from work, the one I've had dinner with a few times?" Emma nodded slowly. "The lady friend," she said, with her grandfather's cadence again. "Yeah," he said. "Her name is Olivia. I really like her. And I wanted you to know that because you're the most important person in my life, and I don't want to keep things from you that matter." Emma processed this. She picked up her spoon, put it down again. "Is she nice?" "Yeah, she's very nice. She's also kind of direct, and she has strong opinions about things, which I think you'll relate to." Emma considered this with the solemnity it apparently deserved. "Does she like kids?" "I think so. But I haven't asked her specifically. I thought maybe—" He paused. "I thought maybe the three of us could do something together sometime. At some point. Not right away, but maybe." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Does she make you happy?" she asked. Daniel looked at his daughter, at her serious 8-year-old face, her cereal going soggy, the crayon map of her imaginary country visible under a napkin at the corner of the table, and felt something sharp and true move through him. "Yeah," he said, "she does." Emma picked up her spoon again and resumed eating. "Okay," she said, "she can come to dinner sometime, but she has to sit in the green chair. That's the good one." Daniel raised his coffee cup. "I'll let her know." Masham. The first time Olivia hesitated in a way that genuinely scared him was a Thursday evening in late May. They'd had dinner at his apartment, the first time she'd been there, a small escalation that both of them had treated with careful casualness, as if it were entirely unremarkable. He had cooked, which he was better at than he usually admitted. Emma was at Carol's for the night. The apartment was quiet and warm and smelled like garlic, and the rosemary chicken he'd spent 40 minutes not quite perfecting. Olivia sat at his kitchen table and looked around the apartment with the quiet attentiveness she brought to everything, and he watched her take in the details the way he knew she took in everything, deliberately, cataloging. Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, the small bookshelf crammed with children's books alongside paperback thrillers, the soccer cleats by the door, far too small for him, the crayon mark on the baseboard near the hallway that he'd never quite been able to fully remove. "She's everywhere in here," Olivia said softly. "Yeah," Daniel said. "That's kind of the point." Olivia smiled at that. But there was something in it, something that was working, something that was looking at the soccer cleats and the refrigerator drawings and the crayon mark and understanding fully what it meant to enter this. They ate dinner. They talked. The evening stretched and deepened in the way their evenings tended to. the conversation moving from easy to real without a visible seam. After dinner, they moved to the couch with the remnants of the wine bottle, and Olivia sat with her legs tucked under her and told him about her sister, Catherine. Older by 3 years, married with 2 teenagers, living in Cincinnati, in a way she hadn't talked about her family before, not guardedly, openly, with the warmth of someone who felt, in this specific place, safe enough to let it out. Daniel listened and asked questions and felt the evening settle around them like something that had been assembled carefully, piece by piece, without rushing any of it. Then, somewhere around 10 o'clock, the conversation found its way, as it sometimes did, as it always seemed to eventually, to what this was. "I think about the timing sometimes," Olivia said. She was looking at the wine glass in her hand, turning it slightly. "Not the age, the timing. I spent my 30s building a career. I traveled constantly. I had relationships that I didn't prioritize because I was prioritizing something else." She paused. "And now I'm at a place where I know what I want. I've known for a few years. And I wonder sometimes whether finding you now, is fortunate or whether it's just—" She stopped. "Just what?" Daniel said. "Whether I'm romanticizing something because I've waited long enough that I've forgotten what's real and what's just what I want to see." Daniel set down his glass. He turned toward her on the couch, and she looked up from her wine, and he said as clearly as he knew how, "I'm not a projection, Olivia. I'm not what you've decided to see. I'm what's actually here." He held her gaze. "And what's actually here has been showing up consistently for 4 months. Not because I have nothing better to do, because I want to be here. Because you are—" He stopped himself, found the right word. "Because you are the most genuinely interesting person I have encountered in I don't know how long, and I would be an idiot to pretend that was accidental." Olivia looked at him. Something moved in her expression. Something that was very close to the edge of whatever she kept on the other side of careful. And then she looked away, back at the wine glass. A breath. "I'm scared," she said, quietly, baldly, without elaboration. "I know," he said. "I've been scared before and been wrong about what I was scared of," she said. "I know that too." "You don't know that. You don't know my history well enough to know that yet." "No," he said, "but I know it enough to understand why you're careful, and I'm not asking you to stop being careful." He paused. "I'm asking you to let careful and afraid exist at the same time as whatever this is, because I think it's worth that." A long silence. The apartment around them was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Outside, the Columbus night moved on without them. Then Olivia set her wine glass on the coffee table. She looked at him, and then slowly, without preamble, she leaned toward him and rested her forehead against his. Just that, just the contact of it. And stayed there for a long moment, their breath in the same small space. It was not a kiss. It was something quieter and more significant than a kiss. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," he said. They sat like that for a long moment in the quiet apartment, neither of them moving, neither of them needing to tell. June arrived, and with it the particular suspended quality of early summer in the Midwest. Warm days and long light, and the city softening its edges. Their relationship had not been named. They had not sat down and applied a label to it, had not had the conversation that is supposed to clarify and formalize. But something had shifted on the couch in his apartment that Thursday night, and after that shift, certain things became simply understood. He was hers. She was his. Neither of them said it explicitly, and both of them knew it absolutely. Olivia met Emma on a Sunday afternoon in the second week of June. Daniel had asked Emma if she wanted to go to the Franklin Park Conservatory, which Emma loved on principle because it had butterflies. He mentioned, in the same casual tone he'd been practicing, that Olivia was going to come too. Emma had looked at him with that forensic attention and then said, "The green chair lady?" And Daniel said yes, and Emma said okay, and went back to her drawing. He had been worried, in the private way of single fathers who have carefully built a life around one person and are now asking that person to expand the circle. He had been worried that the reality of Emma would be harder than the idea of Emma, that the energy and the noise and the relentless specific neediness of an 8-year-old would be a different thing to navigate in person than in the easy abstract of conversation over dinner. Olivia arrived at the conservatory with sunglasses and a crossbody bag and the composure that he'd stopped being surprised by, and Emma assessed her from approximately 10 feet away for a long moment. The full forensic evaluation, unguarded and unashamed, before walking over and saying, "My dad says you have strong opinions." Olivia looked down at Emma. Then she looked at Daniel, then back at Emma. "I do," she said. "Me too," Emma said. "Do you like butterflies?" "I think butterflies are one of the more miraculous things in existence," Olivia said, entirely seriously. "The fact that something can completely dissolve itself and rebuild from scratch and emerge as something different, that's remarkable. Not a lot of living things can do that." Emma stared at her. "That's the best answer anyone has ever said about butterflies," she announced. Daniel exhaled a breath he had not known he was holding. They spent 3 hours at the conservatory. Emma held Olivia's hand through the butterfly exhibit because she had decided, with the swift and total authority of a child who has made up her mind, that Olivia was acceptable. She explained the difference between morpho and monarch butterflies with the confidence of a published expert. She showed Olivia the giant orchids and declared 2 of them ugly, which Olivia agreed with, which cemented the bond permanently. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat within minutes. The particular unconsciousness of a child who has spent all of her energy and has nothing left to negotiate. Daniel glanced at Olivia in the passenger seat. She was looking out the window at the city passing by, the summer evening light making the buildings warm and gold. Her expression was soft in a way he had not seen before. Unguarded, unarchitectured, simply open. "She's wonderful," Olivia said quietly, not turning from the window. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She is." A pause. Then Olivia turned and looked at him. "Thank you for letting me meet her," she said. "She's going to want to show you the imaginary country maps," he said. "I'm warning you now. It's a significant time commitment." Olivia smiled. "I look forward to it." He drove home through the gold evening, Emma asleep behind them, the city around them warm and still. That unnamed feeling that had been sitting in the corner of his life, waiting, patient, unremarkable, was gone. Something else had moved in. Something that didn't need a corner. Something that had simply expanded until it filled all the available space. They had a fight in July. Not a catastrophic one. Not a "you said something unforgivable" fight, or a "what are we doing here" fight. A smaller fight, sharper than its size, the kind that finds the exact spot that hasn't been said out loud yet and presses on it until it has to be. It was about a work trip. Olivia had been offered a short-term engagement in Chicago. 6 weeks? Hartwell Consulting, a significant retail chain doing a full operational restructure. Good work. Good money. The kind of engagement that didn't come along often. She'd mentioned it on a Thursday evening, casually, as if it were settled, and Daniel had said something that came out with more edge than he'd intended. "So you're going." "It's a professional decision," she said. The temperature in the room changed slightly, the way it does when a word lands wrong. "It's not a referendum on us." "I didn't say it was," he said. "You said it like it was." He stopped. He looked at her. He thought, carefully, about what was actually happening inside him. 6 weeks is a long time, he said. I know that's not a reasonable thing to push back on. I know this isn't the kind of relationship where I have standing to push back on your career." He paused. "But I'm telling you that 6 weeks feels like a long time. I'm not telling you not to go. I'm telling you how it feels." Olivia was quiet. She was doing the thing she did, thinking before speaking, assembling the accurate response rather than the reactive one. "It does to me too," she said finally, quieter. "It's not the trip I'm looking forward to. It's what it does professionally." A pause. "But I notice you said you don't have standing." "What?" "You said, I know this isn't the kind of relationship where I have standing." "What kind of relationship do you think this is?" The question landed precisely, as her questions always did. Daniel looked at her. "I don't know what to call it," he said. We've never." "I know we haven't," she said. "Maybe that's something we should fix." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to Chicago," he said, "in 3 weeks. And when you get back?" When I get back, she said, we should have that conversation. She held his gaze. Unless you'd rather have it now. Now, he said. I'd rather have it now. She nodded. A breath. And then, with the precision and honesty that he had come to understand, was simply how she existed in the world. I'm in this, she said. I have been for a while. I've been careful because careful is what I know how to be, and because I needed to be sure I wasn't, seeing what I wanted to see. But I'm not. She paused. I'm in this. With you. With Emma. With the whole... She gestured at the apartment, at the refrigerator drawings, at the imaginary country maps now occupying an entire corner of the kitchen table. With all of it. Daniel was quiet. Okay, he said. Okay? I'm in this too, he said. I've been in this since March, at least. Maybe earlier. He paused. I was waiting for you to catch up. She looked at him with something between indignation and amusement. You were not waiting patiently. I was waiting impatiently, he agreed, which is the most patience I'm capable of. She laughed. He laughed. And just like that, the fight, which had never really been a fight, which had been a thing needing to be said, finally finding the pressure to get itself said, was over. She went to Chicago in 3 weeks. She called him every evening from the hotel, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 20 minutes when she was exhausted. Emma talked to her on the phone twice, which Emma had requested, which Daniel had arranged, and which Olivia had entered into with the same complete attention she gave everything. 6 weeks felt long. It also, in the accounting that happens when someone is absent and you measure the shape of the space they leave, told Daniel everything he needed to know about how deep this had gone. Because the space she left was not small, it was the size of a life. Olivia came back from Chicago on a Friday evening in late August, and Daniel was at the airport. She hadn't asked him to be. He hadn't announced he was going. He had simply looked at the flight information she'd texted him the week before, not as an invitation, just as information, the way she shared things. And he had driven to John Glenn Columbus International at 7:45 with a coffee from the place on 5th that she liked, and a parking stub that was going to cost him $14 and no regret whatsoever. She came through the arrivals gate with her rolling bag and her laptop case and the slightly compressed look of someone who has been in meetings for 6 weeks and is operating on professional adrenaline and very little else. She was scanning the waiting area with the detached efficiency of a person who expects to navigate an airport alone. Then she saw him. She stopped walking. For just a moment, a single, unguarded beat, something crossed her face that she didn't manage to contain, something that was not composed. Something that looked, if he had to name it, exactly like relief. Then she walked toward him, and he held out the coffee, and she took it without a word and stood in front of him in the arrivals hall and said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. She looked at him. She looked at the coffee. She took a long sip and closed her eyes for just a second. And when she opened them, the 6 weeks of Chicago was still in her face. But something else was there too. Something that had come back with her. Something that had apparently survived the distance and the hotel rooms and the conference calls and the professional armor she'd been wearing nonstop since September. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "Welcome home." She was quiet for a moment. Something moved in her expression that she let him see, clearly and deliberately, before she put it away. "Let's go home," she said. He took her bag. They walked out into the late August night, warm and dark, and smelling of rain from earlier, and she reached over somewhere between the terminal and the parking structure and found his hand, and held it, and didn't let go. It was the first time she'd done that. He didn't say anything about it. He just held on. The fall arrived with the particular purposefulness of a Midwestern autumn, cool air arriving suddenly, the trees committing entirely to color within what seemed like a week, the city reorganizing itself around the school year and football Saturdays, and the smell of leaves and wood smoke that made Columbus feel, briefly, like the place it always imagined itself to be. Daniel and Olivia's relationship had crossed some invisible threshold while she was in Chicago, and he hadn't been there to see it happen. He could only observe the results, that she was more present now, more deliberately so, that the perimeter he'd spent months navigating had not disappeared exactly, but had relocated, moved farther out, from a boundary around herself to something more like a boundary around them both. She was still careful. She was still Olivia, but the carefulness was now in service of something she was protecting rather than something she was withholding. She stayed at his apartment some nights. Not all nights. They maintained their separate lives with the deliberate attention of two adults who understood that love does not require merger, but some. Emma adjusted to this with the adaptive fluency of a child who had decided the situation was acceptable and therefore made it so, and who had also apparently decided that Olivia was a valid source of homework assistance, which Olivia provided with a rigor that Emma found both impressive and occasionally annoying. She made me redo my whole math worksheet, Emma told Daniel one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the worksheet in question. Was the math right the first time? Emma looked at the paper. No, she admitted. Then Olivia was correct. Emma turned back to the worksheet with the expression of someone who knows they've lost an argument and is choosing to process it privately. After a moment, she explained it different than my teacher does, and it made more sense. Don't tell your teacher that. I'm not going to tell my teacher that. Emma looked mildly offended at the suggestion. I'm 8, not dumb. Daniel's mother, Carol, met Olivia properly for the first time in October, at a dinner that Daniel had arranged with the care of a man diffusing something delicate. Carol was a warm woman who had also, over 30 years of raising 2 children and watching her son navigate a divorce and the aftermath of it, developed the particular perceptiveness of someone who has seen most of the ways people can hurt each other and learned to assess quickly whether a new person poses the risk. She assessed Olivia for approximately 45 minutes over pasta and bread before delivering her verdict to Daniel in the kitchen while he refilled the water pitcher. She's real, Carol said. I know, Daniel said. I mean it as a compliment. Some people your father and I have met over the years, you can tell they're performing, showing you the version they want you to see. She took the water pitcher from him. She's not performing. She's just sitting out there being who she is and letting us decide what to do with it. That's accurate, Daniel said. I like that, Carol said. It's rare. She headed back toward the dining room and paused in the doorway. She's also clearly terrified of saying the wrong thing to me, which I find endearing. Daniel had not noticed that, and he made a note to find it endearing himself. After dinner, while Emma was showing Olivia the most recent additions to the imaginary country maps, which had grown to encompass 3 full sheets of poster board and now included a detailed economy, Carol sat next to Daniel on the couch and put her hand over his. She's good for you, Carol said, simply, without elaboration. Daniel watched Olivia from across the room, crouched beside Emma at the kitchen table, examining a hand-drawn trade route with complete seriousness, asking Emma a question that made Emma straighten up with the authority of a visiting dignitary. Yeah, he said. She is. No. The first real crack appeared in November, and it came from a direction Daniel hadn't anticipated. It was a Saturday afternoon. Emma was at a birthday party. Daniel and Olivia were at his apartment in the particular comfortable quiet of a couple who had learned to exist in the same space without filling it. She was reading on the couch. He was at the kitchen table going through some operations paperwork that had followed him home. The radiator clicked. Rain moved against the windows. It was the kind of afternoon that felt deliberately cozy. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen and felt his body do something automatic and unpleasant, a small, involuntary tightening. The name on the screen was Claire. He answered it, because he always answered it. Claire was Emma's mother, and calls from Claire could be about Emma, and calls about Emma had no category where he didn't answer. Hey, he said, keeping his voice neutral. Hi. Claire's voice was pleasant, measured, the voice of their particular post-divorce civility. Do you have a minute? Yeah, what's up? I wanted to talk about Christmas. A pause. Garrett and I are thinking about doing something this year. A trip. Europe, maybe. We thought Emma might love it. Daniel absorbed this. You want to take Emma to Europe for Christmas. It's a thought. Nothing's booked. I wanted to run it by you first. Another pause. She'd be home by New Year's. It's just the holiday itself. He looked at the ceiling. Christmas morning without Emma. The shape of that sat in his chest like a stone. Let me think about it, he said. Of course, take your time. Talk to Emma about it if you want. I will, he said. I'll call you this week. He hung up and set the phone on the table. Olivia had looked up from her book. She was watching him with that particular attentiveness, reading his face the way she read most things, precisely and without performance. That was Emma's mom, he said. I gathered. She closed the book. What happened? He told her. He kept his voice even because he was practiced at keeping his voice even about Claire-related things. But Olivia was not a person who was fooled by even voices. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she moved from the couch to the kitchen table and sat across from him. How do you feel about it? She asked. I feel like Christmas without Emma is... I don't have a word for that. I don't like the shape of it. That's fair, she said, but Claire has the right, and Emma would love Europe. He looked at the table. And it's not about whether Claire has the right. It's about whether I can sit in this apartment on Christmas morning without my kid and not feel like I'm failing at the one thing I'm supposed to be doing. Olivia looked at him steadily. She didn't rush to the reassurance. She sat with what he'd said and gave it room. You're not going to be alone, she said finally. He looked up. I don't have anywhere to be on Christmas, she said. She said it simply, matter-of-factly, the way she said things that mattered. My sister's family does their thing in Cincinnati, and I usually go for a few days before, but Christmas Day itself is... She paused. I'm usually alone on Christmas Day. I've gotten used to it. It doesn't particularly bother me anymore. A beat. But I could be here instead, if that helps. Daniel looked at her. Olivia, I'm not saying it fixes it, she said. I know it doesn't fix it. Emma not being here is still going to feel exactly the way you said. She met his eyes. I'm just saying you don't have to feel it by yourself. He was quiet for a long moment. The rain moved against the windows. The radiator clicked. Yeah, he said. Okay. His voice was slightly rougher than he intended. Thank you. She put her hand on the table, not reaching for his, just placing it there, making it available. And he put his hand over hers, and they sat in the Saturday quiet while the November rain did what November rain does. Emma went to Europe. She came home with a suitcase full of chocolate and opinions about French bread and a miniature Eiffel Tower keychain for Daniel and a small snow globe from Vienna for Olivia, which she presented with the gravity of a diplomat exchanging state gifts. I picked it because it has a castle, Emma explained. Olivia likes things that are permanent. Olivia held the snow globe and looked at Emma. That's the most accurate gift anyone has ever given me, she said. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went to unpack her suitcase. The new year arrived, and with it the particular quality of January in Ohio. Cold that was not dramatic but simply total, the city gray and muffled, everyone moving through their days with coats pulled tight and heads down. It was not Daniel's favorite season. It was not anyone's favorite season. But this January had a different texture than previous ones. This January had Olivia in it in a way that made the gray outside matter less. They settled into a life that was not labeled, but was entirely real. Mornings when she was there, she drank her tea at the kitchen table while Emma ate cereal and reported on the ongoing political situation in the imaginary country, which had recently experienced something Emma described as a peaceful revolution, the details of which were complex. Olivia listened and asked follow-up questions, and occasionally offered strategic counsel that Emma weighed seriously before incorporating or rejecting. Daniel watched this from the coffee maker and felt something in his chest that did not have a precise word but that he understood to be the most important feeling he had ever had. One evening in February, almost exactly a year after the coffee machine and the espresso, and you look like you're trying to negotiate with it, Daniel and Olivia were at dinner at a place in the short north, a different restaurant from that first dinner, a place they'd discovered together in the fall. It was a Thursday night, quiet, the kind of evening that doesn't announce itself as significant. They were talking about the year. I keep trying to identify the moment it changed, Olivia said. She was leaning slightly forward over the table, turning her wine glass in her hands, a habit he knew now as precisely as he knew her face. The moment I stopped calculating and just... She paused. Just let it be what it was. Was there a moment? He asked. She thought about it seriously, in the way she thought about everything seriously. The parking garage, she said, In March. That first time. She looked at him.
I said something I wasn't planning to say. I said it felt different. I was trying not to say it, and I said it anyway. I know, he said. I remember. And you didn't do anything with it. You just stood there and let it exist. She shook her head slightly. That was the moment. Daniel was quiet for a second. For me, it was the farmer's market. The honey. The honey? You said nobody knows how to assess honey. You just decide if you trust it. He looked at her. I decided. She looked at him across the table, something in her expression that was open and warm and entirely without the architecture of caution. You bought wildflower preserves for Emma, she said. She likes wildflowers. You were thinking about your daughter while you were falling for me, she said. That's the whole thing, Daniel. That's everything I needed to know about you, and I didn't realize it until just now. He looked at her. I'm always thinking about Emma, he said. She's not separate from my life. She's the reason my life looks the way it does. I know, Olivia said it quietly, with conviction. That's what I mean. They sat with that for a moment. Around them, the restaurant moved. Other tables, other conversations, the ordinary movement of a Thursday night. But at their table, something had arrived that required a moment to acknowledge. Then Olivia set down her wine glass and said, in the same tone she used for things that mattered, I love you. No preamble, no hedge, just the statement, delivered with the directness he had come to rely on, looking at him across the table with those steady, considering eyes. Daniel looked at her. I know, he said. She raised an eyebrow. I've known for a while, he said. I was waiting for you to say it. You could have said it first, she said. I could have, he agreed. But I wanted you to get there yourself. She stared at him. That is the most patient thing you have ever done. It nearly killed me, he said honestly. She laughed. The real one, the short, genuine one, and he reached across the table and took her hand, and she turned her palm up and held his, and they sat like that while the restaurant moved around them. I love you too, he said, in case there was any doubt. There wasn't, she said. But thank you for saying it. Spring came back, their second spring, and brought with it the particular energy of things that have survived a winter and are not taking the warmth for granted. Their life together had a structure now, visible and real. The weekday mornings, the Wednesday evenings, the weekend routines that had arranged themselves around Emma's schedule and Olivia's project calendar with the organic precision of two rivers finding a common course. Diane, Olivia's friend, the one who had pressed on the wound at the river the previous year, had dinner with them in April. Daniel had been aware of Diane's existence and her concerns about him since that Wednesday walk, and he had thought intermittently about what it would mean when they eventually met. He had not been anxious about it exactly. He was not the kind of man who required the approval of people he hadn't met, but he had been aware. Diane knew Olivia in a way he was still building toward. She had opinions. She had earned them. She was a tall, naturally commanding woman in her mid-50s who managed a nonprofit serving at-risk youth and had, Daniel gathered within approximately 10 minutes, the energy of someone who had spent decades dealing with people who were not being honest with themselves and had developed an exquisitely calibrated sensitivity to the same. She assessed him over appetizers with the professional detachment of an experienced evaluator. He let her. He answered her questions. And she had questions, careful ones, the kind that were not accusatory, but were precise. Honestly, and without performing confidence he didn't feel. About Emma. About his work. About what his life looked like day to day. About what he understood of what Olivia had been through before. At some point, he wasn't sure exactly when, Diane's posture changed. Slightly. Just enough. Later, when he and Olivia were driving home, she said, "She liked you." She was deciding whether to trust me, he said. Yes. That's how Diane likes people. She decides they're trustworthy. Olivia looked out the window at the spring night. She pulled me aside in the bathroom and said, a pause. What did she say? Olivia turned toward him, something soft in her face. She said, he knows who he is. That's rare. Keep him. Daniel absorbed this. High praise from Diane, I'm guessing. The highest, Olivia said. He reached over and found her hand on the center console. She turned her palm up.
Papa,
The night that changed everything's trajectory arrived in May, on an evening that had not been planned as significant in any way. Emma had soccer practice that ran late, and Daniel picked her up at 7:30, tired and mud-spattered and entirely satisfied with herself. Olivia was at the apartment when they got back. She had a key now, a small ceremony that had not been treated as a ceremony but was one. And she had made dinner, simple pasta, because she had learned Daniel's refrigerator's patterns and knew what it reliably contained. Emma ate and talked and bathed and did the elaborate pre-bedtime negotiations that were a feature of every evening, regardless of how tired she was, and then fell asleep with shocking totality at 9:15, mid-sentence about a disagreement she'd had with a teammate, gone between one word and the next like a light switched off. Daniel stood in the hallway outside her door for a moment, listening to the silence, then walked back to the living room. Olivia was on the couch with her reading glasses on and a case brief in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was looking at the middle distance with an expression he didn't immediately recognize, something internal, something that was working through a question. He sat beside her. "You okay?" he said. She looked at him. She took off her reading glasses and set the case brief aside. She was quiet for a long moment in the way that meant she was deciding whether to say something, not whether she had something to say. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it before you respond. Can you do that?" "Yeah," he said. She turned toward him on the couch. Her hands were in her lap, very still. The apartment was quiet around them. Emma asleep down the hall, the city outside going about its business. "I've been thinking about the future," she said. Not abstractly, specifically. "I'm 42 years old. I know what I want. I have known what I want for a long time, and I have a breath. I have made decisions in the past that I told myself were reasonable, that I told myself were about being careful, that were actually about being afraid. And I am choosing right now not to be that person." She held his gaze. "I want this to be permanent," she said. "I want you." "I want Emma, not as an obligation, not as something I'm accepting as part of a package. I want her specifically because she is remarkable and because watching you raise her is one of the most—" Her voice did something then, just briefly, something that was very close to breaking, something she steadied quickly. "It's one of the most extraordinary things I have ever had the privilege of being close to." Daniel didn't move. "And I know that is a big thing to say," she continued. "I know it potentially changes the pressure on everything between us, and that is not my intention. My intention is to be honest, the way I've always tried to be honest with you, because you have earned that. Because you have been—" She stopped, started again. "Because the way you have shown up for this, the patience you had when I was afraid, the way you held space for me to arrive at my own terms. I don't have adequate language for what that has meant." Daniel looked at her. He was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know what to say. He knew, with total and immediate clarity, exactly what he wanted to say. He was quiet because what she had just done was rare. Real honesty, the kind that cost something, was rare, and he wanted to give it the space it deserved. "Olivia," he said, "you don't have to—" "I'm not done," he said gently. "Let me." She closed her mouth. She looked at him. "You are the first person in my adult life," he said slowly, choosing each word with the care he gave to things that mattered, absolutely, "who has made me feel like who I am is exactly sufficient, not who I might become, not who I was before everything fell apart, who I actually am right now, this specific person, in this specific life." He paused. "I have been in love with you since sometime in the spring of last year, and I have been waiting to know whether you were going to trust me enough to let that be real, and tonight you just told me you were, and I want you to know—" He stopped. He reached over and took her face in his hands. "I want you to know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life," he said. "Not my job, not this apartment, not anything. You, Emma, and you. That's the life I want. That's the life I'm choosing." Olivia looked at him. Her eyes were bright. Not spilling over, she was too contained for that, too in control of herself, but bright with something that was close to the surface. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. He kissed her then. Not for the first time, but with the weight of a different kind of first time, the weight of something that had just been named completely, out loud by both of them, in a language they were no longer learning, but simply speaking. Outside, Columbus went on as it always did, ordinary, unhurried, entirely indifferent. The city did not mark the moment. The night did not change its quality. The stars, to the extent they were visible through the cloud cover of a May evening in Ohio, did not rearrange themselves. None of that mattered. Inside the apartment, in the quiet between a sleeping child and two people who had chosen each other with full understanding of what the choice meant, something had been built, not loudly, not dramatically. The way the best things are built, slowly, carefully, with the kind of attention that does not rush toward the result but trusts the process. Daniel Carter had driven to work on a Tuesday afternoon and found a woman fixing a broken espresso machine. She had asked him, twice, whether her being older bothered him. He had said no, and he had meant it, and the year that had followed had proven, in the farmer's market and the parking garage and the Wednesday walks and the Chicago phone calls and the Christmas morning and the imaginary country maps and the snow globe and the dinner table and this couch on this night, that no was not just an answer to a question about age. It was the first word of something much longer, something that was only, after all of this, just beginning to be written. The summer after the night on the couch was different from the summer before it, not in the visible, catalogable way. Columbus in June looked the same as it always had, the city expanding into its warm months with the particular relief of a place that has endured another Midwestern winter and is taking nothing about sunshine for granted. The farmers' markets came back. The Scioto riverbanks filled with joggers and cyclists and people sitting with their shoes off in the grass. Emma's school let out on a Thursday in early June, and she came home with a backpack full of end-of-year artwork and the specific energy of a child who has been released from an obligation and doesn't quite know what to do with all that freedom yet. What was different was the quality of Daniel's interior life. Something had settled in him after that night in May, after Olivia's honesty and his own, after the words that had finally been said with full weight and full meaning. Not the settled feeling of arrival, exactly. More like the settled feeling of a man who knows which direction he's walking and has stopped looking over his shoulder at the path he's already covered. He had told Marcus the next morning, called him at 7:15, which Marcus accepted with the grace of a man who had been waiting for exactly this phone call. "She told me she wants it to be permanent," Daniel said. Marcus was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "And what did you say?" "I told her I've been in love with her since last spring, and I was waiting for her to trust me enough to let it be real." A longer pause this time. "Daniel," Marcus said. "What?" "That might be the most you've ever said out loud to another human being at one time in your entire adult life. Don't make it weird." "I'm not making it weird. I'm marking the occasion." A beat. "I'm proud of you, man. Genuinely." Daniel was quiet for a second. Outside his kitchen window, Columbus was waking up, gray-blue and humid, the kind of morning that would become hot by noon. "Thank you for talking me off the ledge approximately 47 times over the past year." 48, Marcus said, but who's counting?" He paused. "What happens now?" "I don't know exactly," Daniel said. "We figure it out." "That's the right answer," Marcus said. He was right. It was. What figuring it out looked like, in practice, was a summer of careful and deliberate construction. Not dramatic construction, not the kind of building that announces itself with noise and spectacle. The quiet kind. The kind that happens one decision at a time, one conversation at a time, one ordinary Tuesday at a time. They talked about moving in together and decided not to rush it. Not because either of them was uncertain, but because Emma's stability mattered, and Emma's stability required that changes to her environment happen at a pace she could absorb, rather than a pace that served the adults around her. Olivia had been the one to name this, plainly, without performance, in the way she named things that needed naming. "She's 9 years old," Olivia said. They were on his back porch on a warm July evening, Emma inside watching a nature documentary about ocean creatures that she had described to them in significant detail over dinner. "She's adjusted remarkably to everything this year. I don't want to ask more of her than she's ready for." "She likes you," Daniel said. "She's been clear about that." "She likes me," Olivia agreed. "And I love her, and that's exactly why I want to do this right." She looked at him steadily.
I'm not going anywhere. There's no timeline I need to meet. We can take the time to do it in a way that's actually good for her. Daniel looked at her. He thought about all the versions of this conversation he had imagined having with hypothetical women in hypothetical futures, and how none of them had looked like this. How none of them had included a woman who led with Emma's well-being before her own needs, who named the careful thing without being asked. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. And they let the summer continue, and they let things develop at a pace that felt right rather than urgent. And this, the quality of not urgency, of choosing to wait for the right moment rather than the convenient one, turned out to be one of the things that made them work. The difficulty, when it came, arrived in September. It came from a quarter Daniel had not been watching carefully enough. His own workplace. Meridian Logistics had been acquired in August by a larger freight management company based in Cincinnati, Cascade Freight Partners. And the acquisition had been announced with the reassuring corporate language that acquisitions always use, language full of words like synergy and optimization, an exciting growth trajectory that experienced employees learned to translate as, "Some of you will not have jobs in 6 months." Daniel was not technically at risk. His role was operational, necessary, and difficult to replace quickly. But the acquisition had introduced a level of uncertainty into his working life that he found, as a man responsible for a 9-year-old's financial stability, deeply uncomfortable. The new leadership team was evaluating everything. Restructuring was coming. Nobody knew what shape it would take. He managed his anxiety about this with the same methodical competence he brought to most things. He documented his work. He made himself indispensable to the transition process. He kept his team's morale as stable as he could, while his own steadiness cost him more than anyone around him knew. He was, in the way of competent and responsible men who carry weight without showing it, extremely good at not showing it. Olivia saw it anyway. She saw it in the way he went quiet sometimes in the evenings. Not distracted, not absent, but somewhere behind his eyes that she had learned to read. She saw it in the slight tightness around his jaw when Meridian came up in conversation, and in the way he refilled Emma's juice glass a fraction too quickly when Emma mentioned something expensive she'd seen at a friend's house. She brought it up on a Sunday afternoon in late September when Emma was at Carol's. They were at Olivia's apartment. She had a place in the short north, the first time in months they'd spent an afternoon there rather than at his. And Daniel was on her couch with his laptop doing something he called reviewing documents, but which she recognized as anxious distraction. "Put the laptop away," she said. He looked up. "I just need to finish." "You've been on the same page for 40 minutes, she said. "Put it away and talk to me." He looked at the screen. Then he closed the laptop. She sat across from him in the chair that faced the couch. A deliberate choice, he understood. She wanted to be able to see his face fully. And she said, "Tell me what's actually happening at work." He told her. Not the version he'd been giving, but the measured, professional, it's uncertain but manageable version, but the real one. The version that included the 3 a.m. calculations about his savings account and Emma's upcoming orthodontist referral and the mortgage payment and what the realistic window was before he'd have to make decisions he didn't want to make. The version that included the particular fear of a single father who has built a careful architecture of stability and can feel the ground under it shifting. Olivia listened. She did not interrupt. She did not rush to reassure. She sat with the information the way she sat with things that mattered, and she let him get all of it out before she said anything. Then she said, "What do you need from me right now? Do you need me to help you problem solve, or do you need me to just hear it?" He looked at her. Nobody had ever asked him that before. Not in those specific terms, not with that particular precision. The question itself was a form of care. "Both," he said. "Eventually. Right now, just hear it." Okay, she said. "I'm hearing it." He exhaled. Something moved through him that was not exactly relief, but was related to it. The particular release of having put a heavy thing down in a place where it could be seen and not judged. They talked for 2 hours that afternoon, about the acquisition, about his options, about the realistic scenarios. Olivia listened and then, when he was ready, helped him think through it with the operational precision that was the professional version of who she was. The same mind that restructured companies and redrew accountability charts, turned on a problem she understood the shape of. "The most important thing," she said, "is not to make any decisions from a place of panic.
You have time. Not unlimited time, but time. Use it to get information before you act on it. I know that theoretically, he said. You know it theoretically, she agreed. The practice is different when it's your livelihood and your daughter. She paused. But you have built something solid, Daniel. You have an emergency fund. You have documentation of your value to the organization. You have options that you're not allowing yourself to see right now because panic narrows the field of vision. He looked at her. Also, she said, and her voice changed slightly, became quieter, more personal, stepping out of the analytical for a moment. You have me. Whatever happens with the job, you have me in this. He held her gaze. The weight of that, the simple and enormous fact of not being alone inside the uncertainty, settled over him like something solid. I know, he said. I'm not sure you've been letting yourself know, she said gently. He thought about that for a long moment. She was right. In the particular way she was often right. Not the right of someone who has the correct answer, but the right of someone who sees clearly. Old habit, he said. I know it is, she said. I'm asking you to build a new one. The restructure at Meridian Cascade came in November, and it was, in the end, less catastrophic than the worst scenarios Daniel had assembled in his head at 3 a.m. His position was preserved. 3 members of his team were not, which was its own particular grief. He had fought for all of them and saved 2 and lost 1, a capable woman named Patricia who had been with the company for 9 years, and the conversation in which he'd had to tell her had been one of the harder things he'd done professionally. He came home that evening quiet in a way that Olivia recognized immediately, and she made dinner and didn't ask questions until Emma was in bed, and then she poured him a glass of whiskey that she knew he kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator for occasions that warranted it, and she sat across from him and said, "Tell me about Patricia." He told her. All of it. Patricia's work, her loyalty, the inadequacy of the severance package, the expression on her face when he delivered the news, the fury he felt at a system that made this outcome possible while rewarding the people who had designed the restructure with bonuses. The guilt of his own survival. Olivia listened. She did not offer the false comfort of, it wasn't your fault because she was too honest for false comfort. She said, you fought for her. You didn't design the system. Both of those things are true at the same time. It doesn't feel like enough, he said. It's not enough, she said. It's just what was possible. Those aren't the same thing, and it's okay to feel the difference. She paused. Write her a reference letter tomorrow, a real one, not a form one. Use everything you know about her and put it on paper where it can actually help her. I was going to do that anyway, he said. I know you were, she said. I'm just saying it out loud so you can hear it as the thing it is. You being a decent human being in an indecent situation. He looked at her across the kitchen table, the whiskey glass between his hands, the apartment quiet around them. How are you so good at this? He said. At what? At knowing what to say, knowing what I need. She considered this seriously, the way she considered everything seriously. I've spent 20 years learning to understand what people actually need versus what they're asking for, she said. It's most of what I do professionally. A pause. But with you, it's different. With you, I'm not analyzing it. I just know. Because? She met his eyes. Because I love you, she said simply. Paying attention to someone you love is not a skill. It's just what happens. Daniel set down the whiskey glass. He reached across the table and took her hand. She turned her palm up. They sat in the kitchen of his apartment, the city outside doing what cities do. And Daniel thought, this is the thing, not the extraordinary moments. This ordinary, quiet, profoundly sufficient thing. Christmas that year was different from the year before. Emma was home. Claire had taken her to Europe once. She had no competing plans this December, and so Emma's Christmas morning happened in Daniel's living room, as it always had, with the particular organized chaos of a 10-year-old who has been anticipating this day for approximately 45 days and is now executing on her preparation with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting a long time. Olivia came in the early afternoon, after Emma had worked through the main event of the morning and had reached the calmer middle period of a Christmas day, satisfied, surrounded, still in pajamas. She brought food, a contribution to the dinner Daniel was making, plus a small wrapped gift for Emma that she had consulted Carol about, which Carol had apparently appreciated being consulted on and had been extremely helpful about. Emma opened it, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor among the ruins of wrapping paper. It was a set of high-quality colored pencils, the real kind, the artist kind, 64 colors in a wooden case, and a hardcover blank sketchbook with thick paper. For the maps. Emma went very still for a moment in the way she went still when something mattered. Then she looked up at Olivia. "These are the real ones," she said. "The good ones. My teacher has these." "I know," Olivia said. "Your grandma told me you'd been looking at them in the art supply store." Emma looked at the pencils for another moment. Then she stood up and crossed the living room and put her arms around Olivia's waist in the particular fierce and unannounced way that children hug when they mean it completely. No preliminary, no performance, just the full weight of it. Olivia's arms came around her. She closed her eyes briefly. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway. He was holding a dish towel, and he had absolutely no intention of moving. Carol, seated on the armchair, caught his eye across the room and said nothing, which was the most eloquent thing she could have done. Later, after dinner, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch between Carol and Olivia, during a movie that none of them were actually watching, Daniel and Olivia stood in the kitchen doing dishes in the particular companionable quiet of people who have learned each other's rhythms. "Thank you for being here," he said. "Thank you for having me," she said. She handed him a serving dish to dry. "This is—" She paused, looking at the living room where Emma was asleep and Carol was dozing in the armchair. "This is everything, Daniel. I want you to know that. This specific thing, right here. It's everything to me." He dried the dish. He put it in the cabinet. "Move in with us," he said. He hadn't planned to say it tonight. He'd been thinking about it since summer, thinking about when the right time was. And apparently his judgment had decided that the right time was now, at the kitchen sink on Christmas night, dish towel in hand, no orchestration whatsoever. Olivia turned to look at him. "We talked about waiting," she said. But her voice was not resistant. It was checking whether this was impulsive or arrived at. "We waited," he said. 7 months. Emma is stable and happy, and she brought you into a hug tonight that she initiates for approximately 4 people in the world. He set down the dish towel. "I'm not asking because I'm impatient. I'm asking because I think the right time is now, and I think you know that too." She looked at him for a long moment. "I want to talk to Emma first," she said, "before we make any decisions. I want to ask her, not tell her, ask her what she thinks." "Okay," he said. "If she's genuinely comfortable, she will be," he said. "But yes, we ask her. And we do it gradually. I don't move everything at once. We give her time to adjust to the new arrangement." "Yes. And we have an honest conversation about what this means, for all 3 of us." "Olivia," he stepped closer. "Yes. To all of it. I'm not asking you to compromise any of that. I'm just asking if you want to come home." She looked at him. The word home landed between them, and she let it land, and he watched her let it. "Yes," she said. "I want to come home." Well, they asked Emma in the first week of January on a Sunday morning at the kitchen table with the particular seriousness that children deserve when adults are making decisions that affect their lives. Daniel had thought carefully about how to do it. He did not want it to feel like an announcement. He did not want Emma to feel that the decision had already been made and she was being notified. He wanted it to be what he'd promised Olivia it would be. A real question. Emma was eating cereal. The imaginary country maps, now on a 4th sheet of poster board, the empire having expanded significantly, were visible on the counter. She looked between her father and Olivia with the forensic attention that had not diminished since she was 8. "We want to ask you something," Daniel said. "And we mean it as an actual question, not a pretend one, okay?" Emma put down her spoon. She gave him her full attention. "How would you feel," he said carefully, "if Olivia moved in with us? If this was her home too?" Emma looked at Olivia, then at Daniel, then at Olivia again. "Would she bring all her stuff?" Emma asked. "Most of it," Olivia said. "Would she have her own space, like for work?" "We'd figure that out," Daniel said. "We have the second room." Emma considered this with the gravity it deserved. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a January morning went about its gray business. Does that mean she's staying? Emma asked. Not anxiously, practically. That's what we're hoping, Daniel said. Emma picked up her spoon. The green chair, she said, returning to her cereal. She already knows that's her chair. She can stay. Olivia made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath. Something in between. She pressed her hand briefly over her mouth. The green chair, Daniel confirmed with complete solemnity. Understood. Emma ate her cereal, and that was that. The move happened in February, slowly and without ceremony. Boxes migrated from Olivia's short north apartment to Daniel's place over 3 weekends, a gradual process that Emma participated in by designating where things should go with the authority of a small and opinionated interior designer. She had opinions about which shelf Olivia's books should occupy. She had strong feelings about where the snow globe from Vienna should live, ultimately deciding it belonged on the windowsill above the kitchen sink where it would catch the morning light, which Olivia agreed was the correct choice. The second bedroom became Olivia's office. Her books, her case files, her particular organized system of document management that Emma observed once and described to Daniel as very serious, which Olivia had taken as a compliment because it was. Living together, Daniel discovered, was the most honest version of knowing someone. He had thought he knew Olivia well. He had thought 14 months of dinners and walks and conversations and the slowly expanding territory of their intimacy had given him a thorough map of who she was. And he had been right, as far as it went. But living with someone fills in the spaces between the parts, the hours between the hours. And what filled those spaces in Olivia was both consistent with everything he'd seen and new in the way that only proximity reveals. She was, he discovered, meticulous about her morning. She rose early, earlier than him, earlier than Emma, and she needed 45 minutes of quiet before she was ready to engage with the world. Not isolation, not rudeness. If you spoke to her, she would respond, but she did not initiate, and she moved through the morning with a deliberate slowness that was, he understood, how she prepared herself for days that required her to be fully operational for other people. He learned to leave her coffee on the counter and give her the morning and not take the quiet personally. She was, he discovered, messier in certain specific ways than her professional composure suggested. Not generally. She was organized and methodical, and her office was carefully ordered, but her reading habits were archaeologically layered. Books accumulated on every horizontal surface she spent time near: nightstand, kitchen table, bathroom counter, one specific armchair. Bookmarks were apparently a theoretical concept she did not practice. She remembered her page number, and she was right about it. And this drove Daniel faintly crazy in a way he found somehow also endearing. She was, he discovered, extraordinary with Emma in the specific hours that Daniel found hardest. The late afternoon hour, that compressed stretch between school pickup and dinner, when Emma was simultaneously hungry and tired and had a week's worth of accumulated social information to process, was the hour Daniel historically managed through a combination of snacks and patient endurance. Olivia moved through it differently. She had an instinct for when Emma needed to talk and when she needed to decompress, for when a question would open something useful and when it would intrude. She did homework with her without taking over. She listened to the elaborate ongoing saga of the imaginary country's political development, which had recently added a judicial system, because Emma had learned about the Supreme Court at school and found it compelling, with the same attention she brought to things that mattered professionally. She tells me things, Daniel said to Olivia one evening, after Emma had confided something about a friendship conflict at school, something she had told Olivia first and Daniel second. He said it without jealousy, with more precision than that, with the particular awareness of a man observing something he didn't entirely understand. Things she doesn't tell me. She tells you different things, Olivia said, not less important things. Different things. Why? Olivia considered this carefully. Because I'm not her parent, she said. The love she has from you is total and unconditional, and she knows that absolutely, and that's the most important thing in her world. But sometimes, she paused. Sometimes a child needs a person who loves them and is also slightly outside. A person she doesn't have to protect. Daniel looked at her. She protects me. She worries about your feelings sometimes, Olivia said gently. She's very sensitive to them, more than you probably realize. She edits herself occasionally to avoid worrying you. She held his gaze. That's not a failure. That's a child who loves her parent deeply. But it means she needs somewhere else to put the things she's edited out. He absorbed this for a long moment. I didn't know she did that, he said. I know, Olivia said. That's why I'm telling you. He thought about Emma, about all the years of careful construction, the life he'd built around her, the ways he had tried to give her everything and been certain he'd missed things he couldn't see. He thought about a 9-year-old editing herself to protect him, and the complexity of love this implied, and the fact that Olivia had seen this and named it for him without making it a wound. Thank you, he said. Always, she said. The question formed in Daniel's mind sometime in April, 2 years and 2 months after the Tuesday afternoon in the 12th floor lounge. It didn't arrive suddenly. It had been arriving for months, slowly, the way a temperature rises, imperceptibly, until the moment it registers. He had not been planning toward it consciously. He had been living his life, and the question had grown inside the life until it was too present to ignore. He wanted to marry her. He sat with this knowledge for 3 weeks before he did anything with it. Not because he was uncertain. The certainty was, in fact, the most uncomplicated thing he had ever felt about anything. But because he understood that this was the kind of question that deserved to be done right, not elaborately. He knew Olivia well enough to know that elaborate was not what she wanted, that grand gestures made her uncomfortable in a way that she was too polite to say, but too transparent to hide. She wanted real. She had always wanted real. He called Carol first. His mother listened to him explain what he was thinking and then said, without a pause, "It's about time, Daniel." He called Marcus. Marcus said, "Finally." Then he said, "I'm proud of you." Then he said, "Does she know it's coming?" "Probably," Daniel said. "She's perceptive." "Does Emma know?" Daniel paused. He had not thought about this, and then immediately he understood that he should have thought about it first. He thanked Marcus, ended the call, and went to find his daughter. Emma was in her room at her desk, working on the imaginary country's new constitutional framework. She had recently decided that the empire needed a Bill of Rights, which she was drafting with a seriousness that her actual 4th-grade social studies teacher would have found impressive. Daniel sat on the edge of her bed. "Hey, Bug, can I talk to you about something?" Emma put down her pencil. She turned in her chair and looked at him. He did not have a careful speech prepared. He thought, looking at his daughter's attentive face, that speeches were not what Emma required. She required honesty, delivered directly. "I'm going to ask Olivia to marry me," he said. "I want to tell you before I do." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Did she say yes yet?" Emma asked. "I haven't asked her yet. I'm asking you first." Emma processed this, visibly, carefully. He could see her working through it the way she worked through the complicated political situations in her imaginary country. Not impulsively, but with the seriousness the thing deserved. "Is she going to be my stepmom?" Emma asked. "That would be the idea," Daniel said. "Eventually, if she wants that." "Will she still sit in the green chair?" He felt something move through him, something warm and slightly piercing. "The green chair is hers," he said. "It's been hers since you decided." Emma nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay, you're good with it, or okay, you need more time." "Okay, I'm good with it." She picked up her pencil, then put it back down. "Dad?" "Yeah." "She's already family," Emma said, simply and completely. "You're just making it official." Daniel looked at his daughter for a moment, at the 10-year-old who had been forensically assessing people since she was 8, who had given Olivia the green chair before either of them had understood what that meant, who had shown Olivia the butterfly exhibit with her hand in hers, and accepted the snow globe from Vienna as a diplomatic gift, and confided in Olivia the things she edited for her father because she loved him too much to worry him. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what we're doing." Emma turned back to her constitutional framework. Daniel sat on the edge of her bed for another moment, looking at his daughter's bent head, the pencil moving across the paper, the deliberate and completely trusting ease with which she had answered. Then he went to figure out how to propose to Olivia. He chose a Wednesday evening, not a special Wednesday, not an anniversary, not a holiday. A Wednesday in May, warm and clear,
The kind of evening Columbus occasionally produces as a reminder that the winter was worth enduring. He took Olivia to the Scioto River walk, their walk, the one they had been doing since March of the year they met. And they walked in the long evening light while the city went about its business around them. He had a ring in his jacket pocket. He had driven to 3 jewelry stores over the previous 2 weeks before finding the right thing. Not a diamond, not the conventional object, but a sapphire set in a plain gold band, deep blue and simple and quietly extraordinary, which was the most accurate physical description of Olivia Bennet that he had ever encountered. He had not rehearsed. He had considered rehearsing and decided against it because Olivia would be able to tell and it would make her uncomfortable and make him sound like someone who had rehearsed, which was not who he was. They walked for 40 minutes. The river moved beside them, gold in the evening light. They talked about Emma's constitutional framework, which Olivia found genuinely fascinating, and about a new project at Hartwell that Olivia was finding interesting in the way she found things interesting when they challenged her. They talked about whether to get a dog, a conversation that had been recurring for approximately 2 months and had not reached a conclusion. Then Daniel stopped walking. Olivia went 2 steps before she realized and turned. He was standing on the river path with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at her. The evening light was behind her. The city moved at its ordinary pace around them. "I want to say something," he said. She looked at him. He watched her understand. Not completely, but enough. Her expression shifted. "Okay," she said. "I drove to work 2 years ago on a Tuesday morning, and I was worried about a 2 o'clock call, and I went downstairs for coffee, and you were standing there fixing a broken machine." He held her gaze. "Everything after that has been the best 2 years of my life, including the hard parts, including the fight about Chicago and the November at Meridian and the Christmas without Emma, and every single time you asked me a question that I needed someone to ask me." He paused. "You have made me better at being a father, and better at being a person, and better at everything that actually matters, and I am completely, irreversibly certain that I want to spend my life with you." He took the ring out of his pocket. Olivia looked at it. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the way they had been bright on the couch the night she'd said she loved him, contained but close to the surface, something that was not quite tears but was adjacent. "The sapphire," she said softly. "It reminded me of you," he said, quiet and deep, and not trying to be anything other than what it is. She was quiet for a moment. "Olivia," he said, "will you marry me?" She stepped toward him. She took his face in her hands, both of them, the way he had taken hers on the couch in May, full and complete and without reservation. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." He put the ring on her finger. It fit exactly. She looked at it for a moment. That attentive, cataloging look he knew as well as he knew anything. "Emma picked the size," he said. Olivia looked up at him. "I measured one of your rings while you were in the shower," he said. "But Emma picked the stone." Olivia went very still. "You asked Emma," she said. "I told her first," he said, "and then I asked for her help." Something crossed Olivia's face that was larger than anything she'd shown him before. Something that broke briefly through the composure she'd spent 42 years building and showed him, for just a moment, the full, unarchitectured reality of what she was feeling. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder. He put his arms around her and held on. Around them the river moved, gold and unhurried, and the city went about its business, and the evening did not mark the occasion, and the world did not shift on its axis. But inside the space they had built together, the space that had started with a broken espresso machine and an amused voice and a question about age that had never, not once, been the right question, something complete and permanent, and theirs had just been named. And naming it, they both understood, was only the beginning of what they were going to build. The engagement did not make the newspapers. It did not trend on any platform. It was not captured in a photograph that anyone other than themselves would ever see, because Daniel had not brought a photographer to the Scioto River, and Olivia would have been quietly horrified if he had. What it did was change the texture of everything. Not dramatically, not in the way that announced itself, but in the way that a room changes when someone finally opens a window that has been painted shut for years. The same room, the same light, but something moving through it now that wasn't there before. Emma's response,
When they came home that evening and Olivia walked in wearing the sapphire ring, and Emma spotted it from approximately 10 feet away with the perceptual acuity she brought to everything that mattered. Emma's response was to look at the ring, look at her father, look at Olivia, and say, "I picked the blue one." "I know you did," Olivia said. "It was the right one," Emma said with finality. Then she went back to her constitutional framework. Olivia looked at Daniel across the living room. He shrugged. "High praise," he said. "The highest," she agreed. Carol cried briefly and without apology when Daniel called her that night. His sister Natalie, who lived in Pittsburgh and had been following the Olivia situation with avid long-distance interest since Marcus had briefed her the previous spring, sent a text that was 70% capital letters and 30% exclamation points. Marcus said, "Finally," again, for the second time in their friendship's history on this specific subject, and then said something that was not often his register, quiet and sincere and direct. "You deserve this, man. You both do. I mean that." Diane, when Olivia called her, was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line. The particular silence of a woman who had sat with her closest friend through a broken engagement and its aftermath and the cautious years that followed, who had pressed on a wound at a river in March because she loved Olivia too much to watch her get hurt again, and who had ultimately sat across a dinner table from Daniel Carter and decided he was trustworthy. "Tell me everything," Diane said. And Olivia, who was not the kind of woman who told everything, told her everything. They were married in September. The wedding was what both of them had wanted without quite articulating it to each other until they began planning. Small, intentional, entirely theirs. 26 people in the garden of a restored Victorian house in German Village that a friend of Olivia's rented for events. The right size, which is to say, not the size of a statement, but the size of a gathering. String lights in the oak trees. Simple food. A jazz trio that played quietly enough that people could talk to each other, which was the point. Emma stood beside her father. This had been Emma's idea, offered one evening in July while she was helping Olivia test centerpiece arrangements at the kitchen table, with the focused participation of someone who had been given a real creative responsibility and intended to take it seriously. "I want to stand next to Dad," Emma said. "When you come in. Can I do that?" Olivia looked at her. "Of course you can," she said. "I think that's exactly right." Emma nodded, satisfied, and returned to the centerpiece evaluation. What Emma did not tell either of them, what she mentioned only to Carol in a whispered exchange at the kitchen table one afternoon that Carol stored carefully and told Daniel about only much later, was why she wanted to stand next to her father. "Because Olivia's walking toward us," Emma had said, with the particular matter-of-fact wisdom that she deployed for things she had worked out on her own. "She's walking toward our family, so we should be there together when she arrives." Carol had looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. "You're going to be something, Emma Carter," she had said. "I know," Emma had said, without arrogance, simply as a fact. The morning of the wedding, Daniel woke at 6:15 to the September light coming through the curtains of the hotel room where he and Marcus had stayed the night before. Olivia, adhering to the tradition they'd agreed on, had spent the night at Diane's apartment with Diane and Olivia's sister Catherine, who had driven up from Cincinnati with the particular energy of a woman who had been waiting for this occasion for years. Marcus was already awake, sitting at the small table by the window with a coffee, looking out at the city. "You nervous?" Marcus asked. Daniel assessed himself. He ran an internal check the way he ran operational checks at work, methodically, in sequence, looking for the thing that was wrong. He found nothing wrong. He found, instead, the particular quality of stillness that he associated with absolute certainty. The same stillness he had felt in November in the parking garage when he'd understood he was not going to let Olivia quietly dissolve out of his life. The same stillness he'd felt on the couch in May when she'd told him she wanted permanence and he'd held her face in his hands. "No," he said. Marcus looked at him. "Not even a little?" "Not even a little," Daniel said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee. "Good," he said. "That's good." They sat in the morning quiet, two men who had been friends for 15 years and drank their coffee while Columbus woke up around them. And Daniel thought about a Tuesday afternoon 2.5 years ago when he had gone downstairs for coffee and come back having met the person he was going to spend his life with. He thought about the 12 minutes that had become 22, and the Thursday headache, and the instruction to drink water first, and the farmer's market, honey, and the parking garage, and the river railing, and her knuckles white. And this feels different, and I love you at the dinner table in February, and the sapphire ring that Emma had chosen because she had understood what it needed to be before he did. He thought about the particular, unhurried, deliberately constructed quality of all of it. The patience it had required, the patience he had not known he possessed until it was demanded of him. "Marcus," he said. "Yeah. Thank you for talking me off that ledge, all 48 times. Marcus set his coffee down. He looked at Daniel in the morning light, and something in his expression was simple and complete and entirely without irony. "Any time," he said. "That's what I'm here for." Olivia arrived at the ceremony at 4 in the afternoon. She wore something Daniel had not seen. She had been firm about this, the tradition observed fully, and he had not argued. What she wore was the color of winter light, a pale gray that was almost silver, simple and entirely right for who she was. No performance, no costume, just Olivia Bennet in the finest version of herself, carrying nothing but a small clutch of white flowers and the particular composure that was hers in all circumstances. Daniel watched her walk through the garden gate. He watched her see him. He watched the composure do what it sometimes did when something was larger than it, hold and then soften, and then let through the thing it was containing, just briefly, just enough. She smiled, and it was the real one, the one he had been cataloging since February of the year they met, and he thought, there she is. There is every version of her that has ever existed simultaneously in one expression. Emma, standing beside him, reached up and found his hand without looking. He held on. The ceremony was short. Neither of them had wanted length for its own sake. The officiant, a woman named Patricia Webb, who had been doing this for 20 years and understood the difference between a ceremony that was about the event and a ceremony that was about the people, kept it direct, warm, and real. They had written their own vows. Olivia went first. She looked at Daniel, and she did not look at the paper she was holding because she had not written them down to read them, but to have them available in case her memory failed her, which it did not. "I spent a significant portion of my adult life," she said, "being careful, not timidly careful, purposefully careful. I had reasons for my caution that I believed in and that I do not regret. But careful, applied long enough, becomes a kind of distance, and I had become very good at distance." She paused. "You asked me a question once that I answered with a question. You told me you wanted to take me on a real date, and I asked you whether my being older bothered you. I asked it twice, and you answered it the same way both times, without hesitation, without resentment, without making me feel that the question was unreasonable." She held his eyes. "You have never once made me feel that anything I needed was unreasonable. Not the time I needed, not the honesty I needed, not the space I needed to arrive at my own terms." She glanced briefly at Emma, standing beside him, and her voice shifted for just a moment, something moving through it that she steadied. "And you gave me something I did not know I was going to love as completely as I do, which is this specific child who chose me a blue stone because she knew what it needed to be before either of us did." She looked back at Daniel. "I choose you. I choose this life, all of it, every ordinary Tuesday of it, for as long as I have." Daniel held her gaze through all of it. He felt Emma's hand in his and Olivia's eyes on his and the September air around all of them, and he held very still, the way he held still when something was so completely right that moving through it too quickly would cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. Then it was his turn. He had also not written his down, for the same reason. "I used to be afraid," he said, "that my life had gotten too small. Not unhappily. I want to be clear about that. Emma is the greatest thing that ever happened to me, and building my life around her has never felt like sacrifice. But I had stopped expecting anything for myself. I had gotten very good at not expecting." He paused. "And then I went downstairs for coffee, and you fixed a broken machine in 45 seconds and told me my headache was my own fault, and every single thing I had stopped expecting walked in and sat down at a table in a building lounge and looked at me over a travel mug of tea." He heard someone laugh softly. "Carol," he thought, "you made me patient. You made me honest. You made me better at being a father by showing me what it looks like to love someone completely without needing them to be different than they are. He squeezed Emma's hand without looking down. I would choose this. All of it. The careful months and the hard conversations and every single Wednesday walk. I would choose all of it again without changing one day. Because it brought me here. He looked at her steadily. I choose you, Olivia. Every ordinary Tuesday, for as long as I have. The officiant said the words. They exchanged rings. Olivia had chosen a simple band for him, plain gold, nothing that required attention, exactly what he would have chosen himself, because she knew who he was. Then the officiant said the thing that licensed the thing that had, in truth, already happened months ago on a couch in a quiet apartment, and a river path in the evening, and a farmer's market in the spring. Daniel kissed his wife. Emma made a sound beside them, not disgust, not the theatrical reaction of television children, but a short, quiet breath that might have been satisfaction. She was still holding his hand. Around them, 26 people who had been chosen specifically and deliberately applauded, and the string lights in the oak trees came on in the early September dusk, and the jazz trio began to play something slow and warm, and the garden smelled of the last of the summer roses. But
the dinner after was what a wedding dinner should be when the people getting married have chosen correctly, genuinely festive without being performed. Carol danced with Marcus, which nobody had predicted, and everyone found delightful. Diane gave a toast that made Olivia cover her face briefly with her hands, and then laugh with the real laugh.
Catherine gave a toast that was longer and funnier, and included a story about Olivia at 26 that Olivia had clearly not pre-approved, and that Daniel filed away carefully for future reference. Emma fell asleep in her chair at 9:15, exactly as she had on the couch during the Christmas movie, with the same total unconsciousness that had been her signature since she was an infant. Carol carried her inside and put her on a couch with a blanket, and Daniel checked on her once, standing in the doorway of the dim room looking at his sleeping daughter in her good dress, and felt something he had no language for, something that was gratitude in the largest sense of the word. Olivia found him there. She stood beside him in the doorway, looking at Emma, and after a moment she put her arm through his. She's extraordinary, Olivia said softly. She picked your stone, Daniel said. She knows things, Olivia said. She's always known things. They stood together for a moment in the quiet of the doorway. Behind them, through the windows and the garden doors, they could hear the remaining guests, the music, the low, warm sound of people being together in the right way. But in the doorway, it was just the three of them, the family they had made, in the particular configuration it had taken to build. Then Olivia said, I need to tell you something. Something in her voice made him look at her. She was looking at Emma, not at him. Her expression was composed, but there was something working behind it, something large, something that was being held carefully. I went to the doctor last week, she said. He waited. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something he had seen only a handful of times, the thing that lived behind the composure when the composure was no longer sufficient to contain it. I'm pregnant, she said. The word landed in the quiet of the doorway and expanded. Daniel looked at her. She held his gaze and did not look away, and he could see in her face everything simultaneously, the joy and the fear and the complicated arithmetic of 42 years old and wanting this and not being certain of this, and having chosen to walk toward uncertainty anyway, because she had learned in the past 2 years that choosing toward uncertainty was the only way anything real got built. How long have you known? He said. His voice was quiet. 4 days, she said. I wanted to tell you before the wedding. I couldn't figure out how. And then I thought, maybe after is better. Maybe after is its own thing. He took a breath. He looked at his sleeping daughter in her good dress. He looked at his wife of 3 hours in the September light of the doorway. Are you okay? He said. I'm terrified, she said. And Daniel, I'm so... She stopped, started again. I didn't know if it was possible. At my age, I had stopped thinking of it as something in my future, and it's... Her composure moved then, genuinely, significantly, the careful architecture of it shifting in a way he had seen only in fragments before. It's a lot to hold. He reached up and put his hand against her face. She closed her eyes. Hey, he said, look at me. She opened her eyes.
You are not holding this alone, he said. That's the first thing. The only thing tonight. He held her gaze. We are going to figure out everything else. But right now, tonight, you are not alone in this. She held his eyes for a long moment. He watched her take what he'd said in and hold it and let it do its work. Then she nodded, small and certain. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. He kissed her forehead. She leaned her head against his shoulder and they stood in the doorway looking at Emma for another long moment before heading back out into the warm noise of their wedding. The months that followed were among the most physically demanding of Olivia's life, and she was honest about this, which was entirely characteristic of her. She did not perform fine. She did not minimize. She experienced her first trimester with the blunt biochemical reality of a body doing something unprecedented in her particular history, and she navigated it with the same methodical practicality she brought to things that required endurance. She threw up 3 times in November. She was deeply tired in a way she described accurately as cellular. Not the tiredness of a busy day, but the tiredness of a body that had redirected its resources and was not apologizing about it. She had a terrifying week in December when a routine appointment produced an ambiguous result that required a follow-up test, and during that week Daniel watched her manage her fear with a composure that cost her visibly, that she maintained not for his sake or Emma's, but because composure was how she survived things that threatened to be too large. The follow-up test came back clear. Olivia sat in the car in the parking lot of the medical building for 2 full minutes after the doctor's call, not speaking. Then she called Diane. Daniel sat in the driver's seat and let her have that call. Let her have the version of this moment that she needed to have with her oldest friend. And when she ended the call, she put the phone in her lap and turned to look at him. "We're okay," she said. "I know," he said. He had sat in the car through the 23 minutes of the call and had not let himself go anywhere inside his own fear, because that was not what she needed from him. And he had learned, he was still learning, he would always be learning, how to be what she needed rather than what was easiest. She reached over and took his hand. "Thank you for being here," she said. "Always," he said. Emma, navigating the reality of an expanding family with the pragmatic adaptability that characterized her entire relationship with change, had her own process. She had known for 2 months by December. They had told her in October, carefully and directly, at the kitchen table over cereal in the way they told her important things. Emma had looked between her father and Olivia for a long moment. "Is it a girl or a boy?" she asked. "We don't know yet," Olivia said. Emma considered this. "I hope it's a girl," she said. "But I'll manage either way." She picked up her spoon. "Does the baby get the green chair?" Olivia looked at Daniel. "No," Daniel said. "The green chair is yours." "Good," Emma said. She returned to her cereal. "The baby can have the blue one. The blue one's actually more comfortable, but nobody knows that except me." She offered this without irony, as the gift it was. Sam. The baby arrived on a Thursday morning in late April at 7:42. She was a girl. Emma, upon receiving this information from her grandmother in the hospital waiting room, said, "I knew it," with the quiet satisfaction of a person whose intelligence has been confirmed. She had brought the snow globe from Vienna, from Olivia's windowsill above the kitchen sink, and she had it with her in the waiting room, turning it in her hands. "Why did you bring that?" Carol asked. Emma looked at the snow globe. "Because it's Olivia's most important thing," she said. "I wanted it to be here." Daniel was in the room when his daughter was born. He had been there for Emma's birth, too. 11 years ago, young and terrified and in love with Claire in the way that 22-year-olds are in love with things they don't yet understand. He remembered the feeling then, the enormity of it, the sudden complete reality of a person where there had not been a person before, the way it reorganized everything in an instant. This was different, not less. Different. He was 34 years old, and he had built a life with intention and care and the accumulated wisdom of everything that had happened since 22, and he held his newborn daughter and looked across the room at Olivia, exhausted and pale and completely herself, watching him hold the baby with an expression that was unguarded in the way she was unguarded only in the moments that mattered most. And he felt something that he would spend a long time trying to find the right language for. The closest he came eventually was this.
It felt like standing inside the life you chose and understanding, for the first time completely, that you chose well. He brought the baby to Olivia. She held her with the careful, deliberate attention she brought to precious things, and she looked at her daughter's face with an expression that Daniel had never seen on her before. Something entirely new, something that had no category in anything she had been before this moment. "Hi," Olivia said softly. Just that. Just the word. The baby, who had been crying with the righteous volume of someone with a great deal to say about recent events, went still. Emma was brought in 20 minutes later, and she stood beside the bed with her hands clasped in front of her in the manner of a person observing a state occasion. And she looked at her sister for a long time without speaking, which was unusual enough that Daniel paid attention to it. "She's smaller than I thought," Emma said finally. "She'll get bigger," Olivia said. "I know." Emma leaned forward slightly, examining. "She has your eyebrows," she told Olivia. "The serious ones." Olivia laughed. Genuinely, suddenly, the real one in the hospital room surrounded by all of it. "The serious ones," she repeated. "It's a compliment," Emma said with complete sincerity. They named her Sophie. It had taken 3 weeks of conversation to arrive at it. Not argument, conversation, the careful back and forth of two people who each had opinions and gave equal weight to the others. And when they finally said it aloud in the kitchen one evening, it had simply been right, in the way that right things tend to announce themselves, quietly and with certainty. Sophie Eleanor Carter. Eleanor, for Daniel's grandmother, which had been Emma's suggestion, offered one evening without preamble while she was doing homework, in the way she offered things she had thought about for a while and finally decided were ready to be said. They brought Sophie home on a Saturday. The apartment that had started as Daniel's alone, the apartment that had held Emma's drawings on the refrigerator and the small, careful, single-father architecture of a life built around one person, had long since been reorganized around a larger life. Olivia's books on every horizontal surface, the colored pencils in the wooden case on Emma's desk, the snow globe in the window catching the morning light, the green chair, now a small bassinet in the corner of the bedroom that Daniel had spent a Saturday in March assembling, while Olivia supervised with the critical attentiveness she brought to anything with instructions. Emma had been at Carol's for the hospital days. She was home when they arrived. She had cleaned the kitchen, which she had never done voluntarily in her 11 years, and she had put wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, which made Olivia stop in the doorway for a moment when she saw it. "Emma," Olivia said. "You like wildflowers," Emma said simply from the couch, not looking up from her book. "You've liked them since the farmer's market." Olivia set Sophie's carrier down very carefully on the kitchen table, beside the jar of wildflowers. She walked to the couch. She sat down beside Emma and put her arms around her and held her in the fierce, complete way that Emma had first held her in the conservatory 3 years ago. And Emma put her book down and leaned into it without resistance. Daniel stood in the kitchen and looked at them and thought about the moment on the Scioto River path 2.5 years ago when he had been afraid of letting this dissolve into nothing, when he had looked at the shape of the space she left and understood how large it was. He understood now what that space had been. It had not been empty space. It had been space waiting to be filled with exactly this. The life they built after was ordinary, in all the ways that matter. Daniel drove Emma to school and then went to work and managed his team and solved the problems that came with managing things at scale, and came home in the evenings to the particular organized chaos of a household with an 11-year-old and a newborn and 2 adults who had both spent their careers learning to impose structure on complex systems and were discovering, with some humor and some humility, that infants are not interested in structure. Olivia went back to work at Hartwell on a reduced schedule when Sophie was 3 months old, and she negotiated this with her partners with the same directness she brought to everything, and her partners agreed because Olivia was Olivia, and Hartwell was not in the business of losing Olivia. She worked from home on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which meant the apartment smelled of coffee by 8 and had Olivia's particular focused energy running through it at a lower frequency, present, working, intermittently available for the questions that Sophie's caregiver, or Emma, on school-off days brought to the office door. Emma took her role as older sister with the seriousness that Emma took everything she decided was worth taking seriously. She researched infant development with the dedication she brought to the imaginary country's constitutional framework. She knew the appropriate developmental milestones for each month. She told Sophie about butterflies when Sophie was 4 months old, in complete and accurate detail, and Sophie listened with the focused attention of someone who found all sound genuinely interesting, which Emma noted as a sign of intelligence. Sophie grew as babies do, rapidly, and with the total indifference to anyone's schedule that is a newborn's primary mode of being. By 6 months, she had opinions expressed through volume and expression. By 8 months, she had a particular look she gave Emma that was, everyone agreed, clearly appreciation. By 10 months, she had Olivia's eyebrows in full, serious and slightly skeptical, which Emma found deeply satisfying. Diane came to Columbus for a long weekend in August and sat in the apartment holding Sophie and talked to Olivia for 3 hours while Daniel took Emma to a Columbus Clippers game and gave the women the space to do what they had been doing for 2 decades, the specific and necessary conversation of women who know each other completely. When Daniel came home with Emma, sunburned and clutching a stadium foam finger that Emma had decided was a reasonable purchase, Diane was in the kitchen helping make dinner, which she had apparently commandeered on the grounds that Daniel's knife technique needed improvement. She handed him a revised grip on the chef's knife and corrected his celery cutting angle and said nothing about the years of concern she had once had about him, because those years were over, and Diane was not a woman who returned to things that had been resolved. Later that evening, when Olivia was feeding Sophie in the bedroom, and Emma was at her desk adding provisions to the imaginary country's new trade agreement, and Carol had stopped by and was in her armchair with her crossword, and Marcus was there with his wife and their twin boys, who had commandeered the living room floor for a board game that nobody had fully explained the rules of later that evening. In the particular warm density of a home that is fully occupied with people who want to be there, Diane sat beside Daniel on the kitchen steps and said, "I was wrong about you." He looked at her. "I told Olivia she had a pattern," Diane said, "that she fell for men who said they were ready and then discovered they weren't. I looked at you, and I put you in that category before I'd met you." "I know," he said. "She told me." "I was protecting her," Diane said. "I don't apologize for that. But I was wrong about the specific case." She looked at him steadily. "You were ready. You have always been ready. You were ready before she was, which is saying something, because Olivia is one of the most capable people I have ever known." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She had reasons to be careful," he said. "She did," Diane agreed. "And you didn't make her feel stupid for those reasons. You just waited." She paused. "That's a rare thing." He looked into the living room, at the board game, and the twin boys, and Marcus's laugh, and Carol's crossword, and the sound of Emma's pencil in the back room, and the quiet from the bedroom where Olivia was with Sophie. "It was worth waiting for," he said. "Yes," Diane said, "it was." On a Tuesday morning in May, 3 years and 3 months after the first Tuesday, the coffee machine, the voice behind him, Daniel drove Emma to school and then sat in his car in the Meridian Cascade parking garage for a moment before going in. He was thinking about something Emma had said at breakfast. She had been describing with great specificity a disagreement that had arisen in the imaginary country between the judicial system and the legislative council over a constitutional question involving trade rights, and midway through the explanation she had looked up from her cereal and said, "Olivia says every good system has to have a way to correct itself when it makes mistakes. Otherwise it just breaks eventually." "She's right," Daniel had said. "I know," Emma had said. "I'm putting it in the Constitution." He sat in the parking garage thinking about this, about the small and continuous way that Olivia had threaded herself into the texture of Emma's thinking, the way her particular vision of how things should work had become part of how his daughter understood the world, not replacing anything, adding, the way good things add rather than displace. His phone buzzed, a text from Olivia. Sophie sat up by herself for 3 seconds this morning. 3 whole seconds. This is apparently a milestone. I have been informed by Emma's research. Then, also your coffee is on the counter. I left at 6 for a site visit. Be home by 6. Then, after a brief pause, "Hi." He looked at the screen. He typed back, "Hi." Then, 3 seconds is impressive. Tell her Emma will want documentation. Then, "See you at 6. He sat in the parking garage for another moment. 3 years and 3 months. The broken machine, and the voice, and the question she had asked twice. The honey, the parking garage in the rain, the river railing, and her white knuckles. This feels different. Chicago, the Christmas morning, the snow globe from Vienna, the couch in May, the green chair, the blue stone, the Scioto River at dusk, the sapphire, the doorway on the wedding night, the hospital room on a Thursday morning in April, the wildflowers in the jar. He thought about Olivia standing in the airport arrivals hall with the slight compression of 6 weeks of Chicago on her face, scanning the crowd with the detached efficiency of a person who expected to navigate alone, and then seeing him. That one unguarded beat, the thing she hadn't managed to contain. He understood now what that expression had been. In a way he hadn't fully understood it in the moment. It had not been surprise, not exactly. It had been recognition. The specific recognition of a careful person who has spent a long time expecting to manage alone and discovers in a single beat that they don't have to. He had been standing there with a coffee from the place on Fifth that she liked, and she had looked at him, and she had recognized something. He had recognized it too. He just hadn't known the name for it yet. He knew the name for it now. He put the car in park and picked up his bag and walked into the building where he had worked for 8 years, where on a Tuesday afternoon in February, he had gone downstairs for coffee and come back with the rest of his life. Olivia had asked him once if it bothered him that she was older. He had said no. He had been right. Not because age was irrelevant. Not because the gap between 32 and 42 was a fiction or a thing to be minimized, but because what they had built together had never been arranged around the distance between their ages. It had been arranged around the choices they had made one ordinary day at a time to show up for each other with the fullness of who they actually were. The age had been the question she asked because she was afraid. The life was the answer they had built together because they weren't. Not anymore. Not for a long time now. The elevator took him to the 14th floor. His team was arriving, one by one, coffee cups and good mornings, and the particular ordinary bustle of a Tuesday morning at work. He sat at his desk and opened his email and began the work of the day. At 6 o'clock, he drove home. Sophie was awake when he walked in, sitting propped against the corner of the couch with the focused gravity of a 10-month-old who is thinking about something very seriously. Olivia was on the floor in front of her, cross-legged, talking to her in the quiet, matter-of-fact way she talked to Sophie, as if Sophie were a colleague whose input was genuinely valued. Emma was at the kitchen table with the imaginary country maps and the constitutional framework and the 64 colored pencils, working. The green chair was empty. The snow globe was in the window. The wildflowers on the table had been replaced with new ones. Emma, this time, who had apparently taken over the wildflower provisioning as a standing household responsibility. Daniel stood in the doorway of his own home and looked at all of it for a long moment. Olivia looked up. She saw him standing there. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. Sophie made a sound, not words, not yet, but something directed and intentional, aimed at him with the focused intensity that she had inherited from her mother. "She's been doing that all afternoon," Emma said, not looking up from the Constitution. "It means she's glad you're home." "You speak baby now?" Daniel said. "I've been studying," Emma said. He set down his bag. He took off his jacket. He crossed the living room and sat on the floor beside Olivia, and Sophie immediately reached for him with the total confidence of someone who has never had a reason to doubt that reaching out will find something solid. He took her small hands in his. Olivia leaned her shoulder against his. Emma's pencil moved across the paper in the kitchen. Outside, Columbus went about its business in the May evening, ordinary and unhurried, entirely indifferent to the specific and irreplaceable thing happening in one apartment on one street in one city. Inside, a family that had been built on purpose, slowly, honestly, one Tuesday at a time, simply continued being what it was. And what it was everything.